What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. As always, I'm your host, Alex Pedikov. I hope you're all having an awesome Monday night. I'm back here. I just went on an awesome camping trip solo up in the mountains in New Hampshire. I really felt good to just get away from the screens, everything. I've been doing a lot of editing lately, as we'll talk about in a little bit here, but felt really good. Batteries recharged. I was kind of in the areas where the wood devil stories are from in northern New Hampshire. So we have an exciting show tonight, and we'll get into the details soon, but a few things to cover first. Jeremiah in the chat says, nice shirt. So yeah, I actually got my Bigfoot Society shirt on. Oh, it's got the podcast part under there. Bigfoot Society. So that is Jeremiah over at the Bigfoot Society podcast. Go check him out. Jeremiah is an awesome dude. Go support him for sure. So folks that may have seen last week's episode, we had a rather interesting show, let's put it that way, with Connor Flynn of Bigfoot Anonymous. The guy, man, he's got some energy. Props to him. I don't necessarily agree with him entirely on some of the things that he says, but you know, we still had a friendly conversation. It was definitely entertaining. I mean, I don't think he was carrying a vibe. We'll put it that way. For next week's show, we'll be talking to Shelly Covington Montana. She is a researcher. Folks might be familiar with her work with the Olympic Project, other things as well. Really cool researcher. Excited to talk to her. I've never really talked to her about her research, so that's going to be super exciting. And I will bring up the intro to our guest in a moment after I show this video. So what I'm going to show here, as I did last week as well, was show a clip from the upcoming Small Town Monsters Beyond the Trail documentary that will be coming out this Thursday. So that's right before Halloween. It's actually already technically out over on the Small Town Monsters channel if you're a squad member. If you want to see it, it's been out since Thursday, but this Thursday it'll be coming out live for the public. So you can check that out, and I'll show a little clip here. And so right before Halloween, perfect timing, and it's called Rocky Mountain Sasquatch. It's about, you guessed it, Bigfoot in Colorado. Really awesome topic. We had a lot of fun making it, and I'm really excited to share that with people. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up here for a minute and show this clip. So I'll be with you guys in a moment. So there's that little tease. As I said last week, that's kind of the opening to the documentary. So if you want to check that out now, go over to Small Town Monsters, become a squad member. Yes, it's a shameless promotion, but if you like what we do, help support us. Obviously, if you don't want to and you want to still support us, this Thursday it'll be coming out, and you can check that out on the Small Town Monsters channel. It'll be also in my playlist on my channel called Beyond the Trail series, containing all 5 of the episodes. This is going to be the 5th episode so far. So without further ado, let's do our intro for our guest tonight. So we're going to be joined by Paul Fuzinski. Paul grew up in the forests of Southeast Michigan. From about 2008 to 2011, he traveled the U.S. with his heavy metal band, and in that time saw Ohio and Florida to everything from the deserts in the Southwest to the forests of the PNW, the Appalachian Mountains, and just about everything in between. That's really where his obsession with the outdoors began. He began consuming the books, as many books as he could, and checking out the landscapes and anthropology, as well as getting actually a bachelor's in anthropology to learn about the origins of humanity, which I think will be really interesting for tonight's discussion. But the last day of his final exam, he actually chose to hike the Appalachian Trail, where he met his now wife. He's an avid outdoorsman. He's hiked and kayaked across many parts of the country. He currently runs the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast, where he talks to travelers and outdoors explorers who have done everything from setting kayaks speed world records to hiking long distance trails, and of course, searching for Sasquatch. Paul is also currently the frontman and producer of the Band Astralborne recently signed to Prosthetic Records out of LA, California. So really awesome. So yeah, what's cool is he's not really in the Bigfoot community, so it'll be really awesome to talk to him. But without further ado, let's just bring Paul in. What is going on, Paul?
I'm having a great time, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm super stoked.
Absolutely awesome to have you on. So obviously you're very much into the outdoors, and we'll get into the story of kind of how we end up linking up, which I think is cool. But Bigfoot, I mean, that's what we're here for. But what I love about this is that you're not really kind of part of the Bigfoot research community, the Bigfoot community, which is in itself kind of a giant mess and craziness all around. But let's kind of just start with the basics, I suppose, before we get into kind of the outdoor stuff. What is your interest in the Sasquatch subject, or how did you kind of come to want to look for it, or just an interest in it? Where did that come from?
Dude, it dates back until I was a child. Like I literally have a Sasquatch tattoo. Like my whole upper arm is a Bigfoot tattoo. So like anything I say that sounds weird, just remember that I do love the subject. My dad grew up I grew up, my dad was like continuously watching every Bigfoot documentary, and everybody's watching live. You've seen them all, the History Channel ones, the Discovery Channel ones. We grew up watching those. And when I was a kid, when you asked me like, what are you scared of? It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't like monsters. It was always Bigfoot. I had dreams, and like, we grew up in the woods. We grew up in Southeast Michigan swamp woods.
Nice.
And like, I always had nightmares, and we'd stay up like 3-4 a.m. when my dad would get off work, and I would have like terrors that Bigfoot was going to look up in our windows because they were like 8-10 feet off the ground. And like, I don't know, man. It's just one of those things. Like, it's always been a persistent part of my life, but I haven't been the person to go out and like search for Bigfoot, because I'm always one of those like super ADHD all over the place, like just learning as much as I can about the outdoors, participating in outdoors activities. But yeah, man, it's always something that's fascinated me as long as I can remember. I don't ever remember a time in my life where I wasn't like thinking about Bigfoot. So it was my first tattoo too, is Bigfoot. Like it had to be. It's like my spirit animal, if there is such a thing, I guess.
That is awesome. That is fun. No, totally. So, I mean, obviously a lot of people have passions about Bigfoot, and I've seen quite a few Bigfoot tattoos. So that's pretty cool. But just want to say hey to everyone in the chat real quick. We have a bunch of awesome folks. Kevin Hamilton, obviously one of our Canadian fans. He says, hope everyone is having a great night. Mine will be better if the Seahawks pull off a miracle and win on Monday Night Football. Go Hawks. Well, can't say I'm rooting for that, but yeah, if that makes you happy, Kevin. We've got the Mountain Beast. Hello all. Is that Justin? That's kind of, I didn't know. Justin, if that's Justin Turnipesky, that's kind of funny. Spike Jeff, what is going on? Sandra says hello. We got Mike, Tactical Bigfoot Research. What is going on? New Hampshire Sasquatch, what's going on, dude? He says Wood Devil Country. Yeah, that's where I was camping this weekend. I always love hearing the good stories of the Wood Devils. Judy, good evening, everyone. Mike Knapp, hi from Wales. Hey, it must be pretty late over there. So how's it going? We've got there's a ton of people in the chat. How you guys all doing? We've got the No Such Thing podcast. That's Cornell. What's going on, man? Jeremiah says Rocky Mountain Sasquatch is a heck of a film. Squad represent. Yeah, thanks for checking that out, and for obviously giving your thoughts on it. We're really excited to show people kind of how that looks. Tate Hieronymus, what's up, Tate? Who's Small Town Monsters? Also, who's Alexander Pedikov, and what's life? Absolutely, good old Bob Hieronymus is relative there. But anyway, so getting back into it, when we talk about kind of the outdoors, obviously I read in your bio, you've kind of grown up a little bit in the outdoors, but you got more into doing stuff like hiking and hunting, and how's that kind of experience been, and what are some of the places that maybe stick out to you in terms of where you've been fishing or backpacking?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously with doing the Appalachian Trail, I mean, backpacking has been a huge part of my life. It's just a weird. I was talking to you, we were chatting a little bit, probably last week or sometime, sitting up at my hunting stand, bored.
Yeah,
right. I'm just sitting there, we're chatting, and I think back on my life, and I said something to you. It was like, my life's just been a series of strange coincidences. Like, it's just, I don't know, I just do stuff, and like weird things happen to me. So like you said in the bio or in the intro, I started out just playing heavy metal. I was a punk, man. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was just out on the road. And that really opened my experiences up to the outdoors, because like you see places on National Geographic and all these TV shows I grew up watching where it's like, oh, the desert. I never had experience in the desert. And the first time I went to the desert, it was freezing cold. So I'm just like, I'm just an Ohio kid from cornfields, or Southeast Michigan. I live in Ohio now, but it's like all cornfields out here. And it's just like experiencing that opened my eyes to the outdoors. And I would say I went to college to learn, like you said, about humanity and the origins. And that's kind of where, before that, I was reading stuff like, what's the Ancient Aliens guys, all those books that all those guys that were on the show wrote. And in my brain, I was kind of like, this doesn't sound right. Like it's a cool idea. It sounds like interesting, but I've always been a very logical person. So I went to school, anthropology degree, all this stuff, and learned about, all the stuff that we chat about on my podcast, which is also coming out on Thursday with you. And we talk about a lot of like human evolution, origins of human species. And that really interested me. And that really got me thinking, I've never done anything like humans have for the last 100,000 years or so. Like I've just played video games and screwed around and didn't really take anything seriously. So the Appalachian Trail was like a kind of like a personal test, like a coming of age kind of thing, even though I was like 25, but I was pretty old when I did it. But I got really just like into these like tests, physical tests, mental tests, and the outdoors has always been a huge part of that for me. I wouldn't say I'm a very competitive person. So it's always like me against myself. Obviously the Appalachian Trail left a huge lasting impact on me. As soon as I got home, I basically started Aptitude Outdoors and went from streaming on my like crappy computer YouTube channels like stuff to I'm in a studio now, and I love doing this. It's like I would rather do nothing else. But to answer your question, that was a long rant. Some of my favorite places in the outdoors, honestly, it's like near and dear is Michigan, man. Like the Upper Peninsula, even like the southern, just below the Upper Peninsula, there's a lot of like great backpacking places, Manistee Forest. And since we're, on a Sasquatch podcast, that's where a lot of these dogman stories come from and all of this kind of stuff. And, the landscape up there is so beautiful to me, and it's so wild and it's so close. It's probably like where you went camping this weekend. It's equivalent to that. Like it's my place. I go in the outdoors, and I just absolutely love Michigan. And I get so many people telling me I need to come check out Southern Ohio, which I'll admit, I don't ever go down there. I've been to Salt Fork when I was a kid. Yeah. I've heard nothing but great things. And before I even knew anything about Bigfoot, Salt Fork connection, all these things, I was at South Fork when I was a kid. We just were kind of chilling out there and having fun. If I would have known that as a kid, I probably would have been terrified the whole trip. Yeah, man, the Midwest for me, I don't get to travel as much as I used to. But last year I went to a podcast conference down in Texas. It was all hunting dudes. And I met some, again, rather interestingly, we talked about, I met Chester Moore, who has done a ton of Bigfoot documentaries and stuff in the past. I went hunting with him. I met like some rock stars down there, Lou Marulu, who's Eric Adams in the huge worldwide famous band Manowar, and all these just weird coincidences. I was telling you, when I was on tour, I was out in, the Bluff Creek area. I was out in Eureka, and I saw these museums like the one in your intro. I've been there, and this is all not by choice. I just did, I was just at these places. I ate it like Bigfoot Burger. I ate the Bigfoot Burger right up the road there. And it's so,
it was closed when I was there this summer, which
oh man, that's a bummer.
I had it in 2016 though. It was really good.
It's such a cool building too, and the artwork inside, Bigfoot roasting donuts over a campfire or something. It's just cool stuff to me. And I get my podcast is all things go. I'm like an outdoors generalist. If you have an outdoor activity, I will go and do it with somebody. I don't care. I just love anything except skiing. I don't like skiing. I'm not a huge fan of skiing.
Oh, right on.
But
keep going. Go ahead. Go for it.
Oh yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell, man. I just love the outdoors, and I've been introduced briefly to the Bigfoot community. I started doing Bigfoot podcasts during October because, as I said on my podcast with you, it's like my out, you know, it's the one time of the year where I can get away with it. And I wish I could do them like often because I have such an awesome time talking to people like you and Emily I had on this year. And last year I had on Connor, for he works out at the Bigfoot Museum out there in Colorado. And I had on, you know, a few other people. I had the head guy from the Ohio BFRO on there, and
Yeah.
all by chance, I just Instagram messaged him. I was like, "Hey, will you go on my show?" Because I'm always interested in Ohio Bigfoot specifically
Yeah.
because it's so interesting, like the grass man and all this stuff, and get these weird cultural like stories about Bigfoot in the area. I did have a Bigfoot guest on last year as well, like who told an encounter story.
Oh,
And it's just
cool.
weird. Like you go to these places that you've been to and you hear these stories and you're like, man, do I want to experience something like that? Because I've never personally experienced any Bigfoot stuff at all. So it's like, man, I really like I do and I don't. You know, I hear a lot of people say that like you always do until you have one, and then you're kind of like, I wish I wouldn't have saw that or been a part of that. So that's like my elevator speech if it was a really long elevator ride, I guess.
Right on. No, that's awesome. I mean, a lot to talk about there. Yeah, it's really cool. Just I love, you know, the having so many different people with the outdoors. That's what's so cool about doing something more general, where you can talk to people who are into hunting,
Yeah.
hiking, kayaking, Bigfoot, because that's ultimately another kind of outdoor recreational kind of thing for a lot of people. It certainly is for myself in some ways. You know, we're serious about the research and we try to be as scientific as we can. But you know, a lot of times it becomes camping with a purpose, and there's nothing wrong with being out in the woods. I mean, this
Yeah.
weekend I was out and I didn't really do any squatching. I just kind of enjoyed the woods. I didn't really want anything going on. You know, I wasn't in research mode, but no, there's just a lot there to unpack, I guess. But it was kind of funny how we ended up meeting. I think you invited me onto your show, right? And
Mhm.
then we recorded that, and as you said, you had Emily and some other people on as well. And you know, I thought the guests you had on previously on the Bigfoot topic were awesome. So really great to kind of join in with that. And I'm excited to see the show when that comes out. And that's the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, right?
Yes, sir. Yep, it'll be out this Thursday, and it will be awesome. We had a super long and awesome conversation. Like I haven't had a long podcast in a long time, and we just kept going. It was so
I know
fun. We
we could
just
just go forever.
yeah,
But
and it
so
was
for
cool to
folks
hear
that want
your
to check,
outdoor stories. Yeah.
oh, for sure. And for people that want to check that out, and that's going to be out this Thursday, but go check out other episodes that he's had. He's got a lot of great content. If you're into other things in the outdoors, not just Bigfoot, if you want to talk about hiking or hunting, which I thought was really cool. A lot of outdoor podcasts don't really go into the hunting stuff, which I think is pretty neat. But something I've noticed too with yourself and a couple other shows, because I see a lot of, you know, now there's a lot more embrace of the Sasquatch topic, I think, as a cultural phenomenon by, you know, I've seen hunting people into it, and people in other outdoor, like they'll put up Bigfoot stickers everywhere I go now, even rural parts of New Hampshire, wherever you see Bigfoot stickers. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. It
Mm-hmm.
seems like now there's more of a willingness to embrace talking about Bigfoot. What have you noticed when doing shows about Bigfoot? How have people reacted to that, you know, that aren't really into the Bigfoot stuff, that might be following you because you talk about hiking or whatever?
Well, we'll put it this way. I got more downloads on Emily's podcast that came out 2 weeks ago than I have for the both episodes I put out last month. So that like people love it, man. And it's like I don't do it as a this is going to get me so many downloads kind of thing. Like I'm truly interested in the topic, but people I think are closeted Bigfoot enthusiasts and they don't want to admit it. So like when I put stuff out like that, I think they're more willing to secretly embrace it. Like they want to hear the stories. They want to hear about Bigfoot because it's always something that's in the back of your mind when you're outdoors. It's like the boogeyman of the outdoors almost. Like everybody knows about it, but nobody wants to think or talk about it. And it's really interesting to me. And I've always said, like, I'm just like a punching bag, man. I don't really care. Like I I'm I'm not like in the Bigfoot community, like in the sense that you
Right.
are, where you're making documentaries and your podcast is specifically on Bigfoot and stuff like that. But I think you guys do, especially your breed of what you're doing, because you're actually taking like a more scientific approach and you're actually like asking really hard questions. I come across some stuff occasionally that's just like, what are you talking about? As someone who spends a lot of time in the outdoors, like I probably spent hunting in the last week, I probably spent 30 hours just sitting in a tree stand, dead silent in the woods. And, you hear weird stuff all the time. And like, as much as, you want it to be Bigfoot or something, it's usually like deer or coyotes or weird stuff like that. But I really just, I think it's such a cool topic. And I think it does open up a lot of people to thinking kind of outside the box. And, whether they believe in Bigfoot or don't believe in Bigfoot, it's still such a cool topic to just dwell on and think about. I mean, I listen to Bigfoot podcasts when I'm out there hunting. Creeps you out sometimes? Yeah, a little bit. It's dark out there. You're walking through the woods in the pitch dark, and it is what it is. But man, I think it's such a fun and an awesome thing to think about.
Yeah, well, it's funny. That reminded me of recently I was out in an area in New Hampshire with kind of one of my research areas, and actually I was with New Hampshire Sasquatch, who was in the chat earlier, and we ran into a hunter in a tree stand, and kind of talking to him, and I never said I said we were out there foraging. That's kind of what was the cover story, right? Instead of what we were actually doing, which was true. He was teaching me about some of the stuff, but we start hearing this whistling, and we're looking around, where is this coming from? He was really well blended in, but we start talking to him, and I don't usually like to ask, oh, hey, have you, I kind of ease into it. I'm like, oh, have you had anything weird ever happen out here? He's like, well, no, but when I'm leaving at night, it's definitely a little freaky, and I kind of have like Bigfoot in the back of my mind. He said it almost like a joking way. So I kind of hear what you're saying. I think there's a lot of the term you put it, closeted Bigfoot enthusiasm out there. I think because you have had the tremendous, as some people love it, some people hate it. Finding Bigfoot really put Bigfoot on the map nationally, like no other show or program has done before, in terms of Bigfoot is not just skunk ape or Pacific Northwest. It's Ohio, it's New England, it's all over the place in terms of it being culturally kind of present. So you have a lot more enthusiasm. It's interesting that you'd say that those episodes do pretty well. But something I like to do, and because I love all the other outdoor stuff, as we talked about even on your show, I love bringing in those other elements. So when I'm out there, half the time, I just enjoy talking about if I find moose sign or other animals. I mean, moose are one of my favorite animals. Just because I've gotten messages from people that aren't even into Bigfoot that will say, "Hey, I just watched your guys' Mount Hood episode, and I'm not really into Bigfoot, but I was going to go hiking in that area, and I had no idea what it looked like, and now I have an idea of what to expect." Like that kind of stuff. We're trying to reach beyond just the Bigfoot community, because unfortunately, the Bigfoot community is largely a joke. I mean, for the most part, you have some great researchers and there's some great people. I've met some of the nicest people I've ever met through this field, but largely it's seen as a joke. And the things that get traction in the media are silly things like people running after and shooting at something they don't know what it is in the woods, or a big hoax like in 2008 with the Bigfoot body Georgia hoax. So there's a lot of clownery going on in the community. And that's why I think people are interested in the stories, because they know maybe somebody who's had something weird happen, or they've heard a story, but they don't want to come out in the public and be like, I'm into this, because then they get lumped in with the crazy. So we have a very tough time, kind of trying to be taken seriously. And maybe that's our own faults. I don't know. But some of us are trying to raise the bar, because when you go out in the woods, not everything's Bigfoot. There's obviously a lot of stuff out there. Animals can do a lot of weird stuff. So, yeah, it's totally out there. But I see there's already a lot of great questions in the chat, but we'll get to some of that. There was some trolling going on too, so I don't know.
Oh, that's par for the course, man. I'm ready. I'm used to that.
It was
trolling questions.
It wasn't about you. It was just kind of in general. There was just some troll. We usually get some stuff like that. I don't really know what's going on, but something weird. But that's the whole chat. I kind of look at the chat a little bit. But yeah, that's the internet for you. But absolutely awesome. So getting kind of back into it in terms of the outdoor stuff. So as somebody who's spent a lot of time out there, you think about something, taking aside perhaps your personal interest in the Sasquatch topic. What do you think about the viability of something like that possibly existing in some of the wilder areas of North America, if possible? I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm very torn on the topic, because like getting an anthropology degree for me is like a very logical science. It's like, and it's in academia. Some people say like, oh, it's not scientific. Oh, it's all analogous stories of like, personal anecdotes and talking. And then you have like outdoors. I have so many idols in the outdoors. I mean, on one end, I have like obviously like meat eater. I love hunting. It's like my newest passion I've had for a long time. You have Steven Ranella, who's like a fantastic writer. He's an amazing, you know, documentary maker, and he's got the show obviously, and he's totally like, this is total like nonsense, whatever. There's no way. That dude spends a ton of time outdoors. And then you have my other idol on the exact opposite end. You have Les Stroud, who's like, this 100% exists. I believe it. I'm 100% on board. And I'm here in the middle, like, I don't know what to believe, because I've also spent a ton of time in the outdoors. Never had any encounters, but I've never also been like, I've never looked for Bigfoot. I don't, you know, so it's very tough for me to answer that question like yes, no. Do I want Bigfoot to believe or exist? Yes. I would think that would be the coolest thing ever. Anytime even the 2008 thing came up, I was so stoked. I was working like a crappy landscaping job. I was like doing maintenance on trucks, and I was had it was like first when you could like get, I think, like Facebook and stuff on cell phones. Like it was really primitive back then, and or something. Or I saw like somebody texted me maybe an article of like Bigfoot found, and then they had like the suit and a cooler or some crap. And it was man. I was so excited. I remember getting off work, running home, and like going to Google and being like, oh, and then it was like, this is a hoax. And I was so bummed because I wanted it to be real so bad. So I know that's like the worst answer you could give. That's like the politician's answer, but like, I am not against Bigfoot. I just have never had any personal experiences to validate it. And as someone who's trained in like, you know, anthropological writing, and like I did like undergrad thesis and stuff, and like learned how to write and take interviews, I learned very quickly that interviews can be very, very skewed, and people don't remember things very well. And like a prime example is, this is from me. I had a very tense moment in a deer stand the other day with a deer. Like we had like a 2-man face off. It was full draw. I like had like basically a 2-second gap to get my bow pulled back. And if anybody that's hunted with a bow before knows, you pull back and then you have to lift it up to your eye. And like, I got the pullback part, and there's like 70 pounds of tension on this thing. I mean, there's a little let off with the bow and the way the cams work and all that crap. But like, this deer is staring directly into my eyes. Like we are like this. I have full tension on this bow, and I'm shaking, trying not to make and then 5 minutes go by, I swear. And like, I couldn't hold it anymore. And I just flinched like this, gone. Like, and you know, I'm trying to recount this story to my GoPro as soon as this deer's gone. I'm like, cause I film everything, cause that's what I do. And I couldn't remember, like the story was so jumbled because my adrenaline was so high. And like, I don't like the tenseness of the moment made everything so skewed in my brain. Like I couldn't think clearly about it. And when I think back on that moment, like how did this actually happen? Am I just a bad hunter? Or like, you know, and if that can happen to me, that can happen to anyone. So like, I always take kind of personal anecdotes with a grain of salt. And I'm a huge Sasquatch Chronicles listener. I'm literally like 500 episodes deep. Like I love that show so much. And like, it's so hard to take personal stories as evidence sometimes, because, you know, they're not always accurate, or at least 100% accurate. There's usually grains of truth in them. And I want to believe people so badly, but I know that stories get skewed, especially when someone's talking like, oh yeah, 45 years ago, I saw this Bigfoot, but you're trying to like, dude, I don't remember what happened 4 years ago. I can't remember anything. Telling you tour stories, half of it's probably made up in my head at this point. You know? Right. So like, to me, yes, I think it's possible. If any of the stories out there are possible, it's Bigfoot for sure. I would say I have a hard time with other stories, you know, like some of the more out there stuff with like talking like Dog Man and this and that, because there's no evidence in the fossil history ever of something like that existing. And that's not to say I know what I'm talking about either. I just have an undergrad degree. It's not like I'm a PhD in physical anthropology or anything. But yeah, man, that's my answer. That's how it sounds in my head too. So if I sound like a psycho, that's
no, it's like very reasonable. But would Dogman, would that technically fit under anthropology, or would that be zoology, right?
Yeah, I just the
origins of man. I don't know.
A walking person with a dog's head is just too far out there for me to grasp. And that's not to say, people haven't seen things like that on their
Right.
own. It's just for me, and I grew up with dogman stories, dude. We were growing up on
Sure.
lakes up in Michigan. We used to be scared crapless about dogman. Like,
Oh,
we'd
I
sit up
bet.
in the woods as like little kids, like telling stories about this. And the Michigan dogman, that's what we always talked about. And we were like running through the woods at night, like, I'm going home, I can't handle it, stuff like that. So I'm like no stranger to these topics. It's just
Right,
as an
right.
adult and going through that scientific training, it's just like,
Sure.
I don't know what
Where
to
where does
believe, man.
Anubis fit on the scale, right?
Yeah,
No,
100%.
I think it's really refreshing to talk to somebody that's not coming from that Bigfoot research mindset or anything, because I think that's what largely most humans on the planet right now aren't like that. I mean, obviously you have an interest in it, but yeah, you bring up an important point about anecdotal stories, and things can change, with the way your memory remembers things. I mean, at times, if it's a traumatic experience, maybe certain negative elements that you felt can be played up. Obviously, we
Mm-hmm.
get emotionally attached to these stories, especially if they were
Right.
traumatic. I think, some people obviously are more probably keen to remember greater details than others. But
Mm-hmm.
and this is something you've probably heard from Connor Anderson before, and Emily's probably talked about it, and other people as well. And I completely agree with them. I think the most useful, there's two things I think that eyewitness stories can be useful in terms of this research. The first is, if it's a recent sighting, maybe being able to go to that location and find physical details. So tracks or hair or scat, something like that you might be able to say, well, hey, there's at least another form of evidence. It's not just anecdotal. And the second is, and this is maybe less so, but is the behaviors. If there were certain behaviors shown or demonstrated, whether it be smell or something like that, that maybe link up to reports in other parts of the country, consistencies that are found with a species, behaviors that keep popping up. And then, for example, one of my favorite examples to point to is kind of the ape behaviors that have been reported across North
Mm-hmm.
America hundreds of years before we knew about any kind of ape behavior, before we had really studied gorillas and that kind of stuff. But yeah, unfortunately, aside from that, eyewitness stories are largely kind of useless. They are interesting, and I love hearing stories, and I've been so blessed to hear stories, from all sorts of people, all kind of walks of life across the country, all over the place. Been really interesting to hear some of those stories. Yeah. So yeah, I think you're right about the anecdotal stuff. And if a lot of the times, and you talk good about the people who are out there a lot, hunters, and I've talked to a lot of people that are into hunting, and they're like, oh yeah, there can never be anything like that, I'm out there all the time. But then I've talked to some that are just out there and they have one thing happen, and they're like, well, I hunted for 50 years out in the woods all the time, and then I had this thing happen, and I never would have known beforehand. I don't think it's, sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. These things seem to be in some pretty remote areas generally, kind of on the edge of civilization. So it's not like running into other wildlife, I would assume. So yeah, totally interesting.
Well, and it's wild because I have friends that 100% believe in it, and we talk about it all the time. Like, I'm no, I'm not like one to shy down from like saying what I believe. And it's like, it's always, I always go, I'm like, I go one day I'll wake up and I'll read a bunch of books and I'll be like, dude, like, I don't know. There's no way that this can be real. And then I'll hear some stories and I'll talk to some friends. Like, I had a guy, he's an awesome dude. His name's Jonathan Zaharik. He was on my podcast, and we were just talking
I've
about,
listened to that one. Yep.
yeah, he's like an ultra runner up in the Adirondacks. Dude's just a monster in the mountains, amazing photographer, videographer. And he's telling me these Bigfoot stories on the podcast. And I'm just like, I know this guy. This is weird, man, because like, he's telling stories that you've heard 100 times, water splashing in the middle of the night, throwing stuff. You hear that he's gotten rocks thrown at him. And it's just like, then it comes from with someone personally, and you're like, oh, or my friend James, he's super into it from the 46 podcast. It's like,
That's
oh my
actually,
gosh,
that's where I first heard them talking about it, when they had Seth Breedlove on, and they were talking about Bigfoot, because we had obviously done On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey in the Adirondacks. So Jonathan tells those stories, and there's a lot of those stories, and they talk about talking to people that work with the Adirondack Park or whatever. But yeah, no, it's always interesting to hear people who aren't in that community kind of talking about it.
And well, the one thing, you know, and I have a lot of friends who are naturalists. Like I used to work at a park district for a while, and they're all, you know, hard nosed. You know, I see these animals every day. I know where to find all the rare ones, all this kind of stuff. And they're all like, "You're crazy for even bringing that on your podcast." And I'm like, I like it. I love to talk about it. I'm not ashamed to like say Bigfoot. I'm not gonna just bash on people, even though it seems doesn't work in the opposite way. People love to tear it up on the other end, but it's like, man, it's just such a cool topic. And like, and then you have like, you know, Dr. Meldrum, and he's a bona fide PhD. Like, I'm not gonna argue with this guy. He knows a heck of a lot more than me. Like you know, you hear these, you know, scientific validations of like, there's no way that this could be anything other than a gigantic foot. You're talking about like dermal ridges and the way the foot flexes different in the front and the back, more like a chimpanzee, all this stuff. Like, I'm not uneducated on the topic, I guess you
Right.
could say. It's just like, I've never gone out with someone like you or anybody who's like, I can show you some wild stuff, dude. Like, you know, I'm not opposed to that either. It's just kind of one of those things. You have to have a chunk of time to go do that too, you know? And, you know, physical evidence is physical evidence. If it's there, it's there. Like, there's no arguing with that. And, you know, I don't know how deep on a rabbit hole you want to go, but it's your show. So I'll let you,
No,
I'll let you
absolutely.
handle that.
And I appreciate that. And that's what I like with the anthropological background as well, because I find that one of the biggest things I found interesting, and this even goes back to before I was kind of out in the public about doing documentaries and doing shows and stuff, I was always interested in more armchair research in Bigfoot. I ended up doing a lot of anthropology reading, especially when I was in school. That just kind of comes with the territory, right? I mean, there's
Yep.
all kinds of thoughts within the Bigfoot community, the more paranormal stuff, whatever. But just learning more about anthropology and all these different humans, you know, the Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit, the Denisovans, all these different things was really interesting. I mean, the stories, I'm very fascinated in those stories about the wild men in Eastern Europe. You know, I have family background there. And then into Russia, you have the Almastis, and sometimes we're seen with tools and clothing. And it makes you wonder what we're dealing with here if there were multiple kind of creatures. Obviously, the Gigantopithecus, possible connection with the Yeti, and all those stories, really fascinating. So I love being able to talk kind of anthropology with people, especially because I think it's an important part of it. And you know, even if Bigfoot, you know, people say Bigfoot, you know, it's obviously not real. I lean more towards it probably existing, but even if it's not, hypothetically, let's say this is still some kind of a reflection of our humanity or something. I mean, it's we're projecting this creature out in the wilderness, and all these different cultures around the world, especially, you know, on this continent, especially with Native Americans and other people as well. You know, so there's something anthropologically very interesting going on here. I think if you just study it from that perspective as well. I mean, if you don't want to look for Bigfoot physically, just if it's not real, why is there this constant need for it to almost exist in almost every culture, and people that are seemingly not connected in any ways, that live continents apart, still reporting similar things. So I find that to be very fascinating part of the conversation. But
Yeah. And
go for it.
I was going to say, I've seen like a lot of cool artwork around Sasquatch, and I really do. I think it's so cool. I mean, like, I have what is it over here? I have the little Bigfoot sign, you know, like the one you'd get at like any store you'd find on the side of the road, just like the little signs and stuff. But I think some of the traditional Bigfoot artwork from like Native Americans and stuff is so cool. I actually had, as part of my like undergrad in anthropology, I had to take a prehistoric art class, basically like Native American art. It was a little bit of like cave art, stuff like that. We learned about art from all over the world. And I actually did a wood carving project, and I made like the traditional Pacific Northwest, like totem pole of a
Cool.
Sasquatch. And like, it was just so cool. Even my art teacher at the time, he was just like, I can't believe you like cut down a tree and carved this. It was like the full outdoorsman experience. Yeah, man.
I
That's
love
it.
these little
That's it.
like these aren't
Yes.
Sasquatch related, but I just love those the cult
Yeah.
that representation. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a cool. I actually have it in my front yard. It's all weathered and beaten up right now. It was the only thing I have ever made that you would consider artistic. I'm not an artist. As you can tell by this wall behind me, I just pack stuff to the wall. I have no idea what I'm doing, but you know, it was one of the few.
It's a lot different by me, you know.
But yeah, man, I think there's actually like no way to say that from a evolutionary standpoint, like there's no way to say like something like this is not possible because there's already precedent for it. I mean, you have so many different lineages of the human tree that we found physical evidence of, skeletons, fossils. We've got footprints of out in Africa and in Ethiopia and things like that. And you got the big rift out there in Africa where they find all these crazy prehistoric humans. And I swear, dude, every year the date for human like modern anatomically modern humans gets pushed back by like thousands of years. I think last time I checked, it was between 200,000 years. And that's like, it just keeps getting further and further back. And so humans existed around the same time as some of these other species existed. Obviously, definitely ate Neanderthals and things of that nature. But I mean, prior to that, there's Australopithecines and all these like just pre-humans. And, these have existed in the past, things of this nature, not to say Sasquatch as a current species, if they exist. All these things have been around. They're there. They've existed. We have fossil evidence. I've been to the Cleveland Museum to see Lucy, man. It's like a 2-hour drive from here. Wild. Like, I've seen this stuff. I've been obsessed with it for 10, 15 years now. And like, that's why I haven't written off Bigfoot, because like every time I turn around, I was like, it could happen. This could be real, dude, because I have that anthropological background and I just want it to be real so bad. I just haven't made that commitment yet,
Oh yeah. That's super cool. I mean, yeah, I remember as a kid seeing Lucy when that first came out back in the late 90s. It must have been Museum of Natural History, New York, seeing that and like, whoa. But yeah, that's such a fascinating part of it. I mean, as Mike of Tactical Bigfoot so greatly puts it, anthropology and archaeology play a big part in this whole study, even if we are just looking, why are we getting out in the woods? Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, it's such a great part of it. I'm really glad you brought up a lot of that. Just all the time you hear these new things. And that's what I think was so interesting about something like the Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit, being discovered in an area where there are these indigenous and, colonial stories of hairy, small, man-like people were very tiny, smaller than other humans that live in that area, very like midget almost like. So there's so many of those stories, and the Caucasus, which have produced so many of the Denisovans and all these different human and Neanderthal kind of offshoots. That's where a lot of the sightings, some of my favorite sightings that have happened. One of them in particular was during the Russian Civil War, after the Russian Revolution, between the White and the Red Army, where they came upon this cave and this hairy man-like creature came out and they shot it and buried it there. And you have stories like that exist. You have these deep mountain crags that maybe groups of Neanderthals. And I brought this up on previous shows too, with the stories of trolls and ogres in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe, where those maybe just groups of Neanderthals that managed to stay hidden and went extinct ultimately, but were hiding away, and then were seen by people in the Middle Ages who thought, wow, look at these swarthy creatures. They hadn't seen anything like that. I just find it so fascinating. Gigantopithecus, of course, which was alive at the time as humans would have been in that part of Asia, which the largest ape in history. So completely interesting. As Mothman 46 says, those were Oompa Loompas. Could very well be. Kevin Hamilton brings up a good point. He says Jane Goodall believed they could exist. Yeah, she did say that she didn't exactly endorse Sasquatch, but she said she wouldn't be surprised, more or less.
And I mean, it's not impossible that there could be a small population. I mean, how many? I mean, the ape numbers, unfortunately, across the globe are just dwindling because of civil wars and things like that, like meat market trade, all this stuff, and it's unfortunate. But I mean, it goes to show that small populations can exist. And like, I was actually rereading to prepare for this podcast. It's been a while. I reread Meldrum's book. And some of those facts are just wild, man, because like he's talking about how there's literally evidence, and people need to study chimpanzees more because they're so just enthralling, man.
So like fascinating.
They're fascinating creatures, and they kind of go hand in hand with like how Bigfoot reports are. Like, they're not these gentle, loving creatures like you see on these like Disney Planet, like Animal Planet shows where they're like hugging their owners and stuff. Like, they will not, like, they will tear each other up and like rip each other's like genitals off and stuff. Like they're brutal
Oh my
creatures, and they
gosh.
can be like they're. Have you ever seen like a picture of a chimpanzee just strutting through the woods? That's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, dude. They have like a six
Very
pack. Their
intimidating.
biceps
Yeah.
are like massive, and like chimpanzees are very like intelligent. And they, what I was getting to with Meldrum's book is like, you know, you go back and you take a look at these things, and there's people studying them continuously, and it's like you learn more about humanity every day from studying these creatures. They said they will actually like cover up their footprints,
Yeah.
or they will like, if they leave the nest in the morning and some others are trailing, they'll follow their footprints. Like they're not stupid animals, you know. Like I don't think any animals are stupid. That's just because I'm a hunter and I realize how
Oh yeah.
smart these creatures are. Like if a deer doesn't want it to be seen, it's not going to be seen. Or conversely, they'll just walk right up to you and you're like, what am I doing right now? It's a tough thing, but like, yeah, they're very intelligent creatures. And like, if there is an ape running around in America, it does not want to be bothered. That's why these reports come out of like remote places. And if they do come
Yeah.
out of popular places, they're going to be, if they are out there, they're going to be, you know, pretty bold to come into like a community or
Right.
something. And that's that's why it just persists in my mind, because like there's so much evidence like of real existing creatures of you know, apes, you know, chimpanzees, gorillas, and primates in general, of how intelligent they are. Like if I think when Jane Goodall went out, I've read all of her books, and when she went out to first study these things before she was the Jane Goodall we know today, she was just a young kid out in Africa, and I think it took her like months to even find the
Yep.
chimpanzees. It's just wild. So like these kind of like real life things that have happened really get my brain turning. And I'm that kind of guy. I always like drive my wife nuts. I always say I don't have an off switch. Like I'm either like working crazy, looking up stuff, reading, doing podcasts, talking to people like you until 1 a.m, or I'm just asleep. Like that's the only two on and off modes I have. So yeah, man,
No, I mean, absolutely. I hear you totally. And I just find it really interesting. That's why I kind of like that idea of a convergent evolution. The idea that if these things, I think it's probably the most plausible reason these things are as elusive as they are. And I mean, I don't know, unless you just keep explaining it away with an endless myriad of excuses as to why, you know, trail cameras, all this stuff. But the idea that, you know, these things have seen how destructive we can be, they kind of learn to live on the edges or live away from us. And you bring up a great point with Jane Goodall. And I always tell this to people, you know, it was those apes that essentially allowed her to have an encounter, experience them. So they were completely in control of the it was a one-way conversation up until they saw that she wasn't a threat because of her repeated action. A lot of people that have, quote, habituation, unquote, kind of sites in North America claim that they have interactions with Sasquatch based on trust. And I mean, I don't know the validity of that. Obviously, I'm not really doing anything like that. I have an active research area I go to, but you know, I haven't really had that, I guess, level of success. But it's pretty interesting. And apes are such fascinating creatures. I mean, I've recently read about the first sort of inter-ape conflict, aside from with humans, because you know we get conflict with every ape, including other
yeah,
people,
ourselves.
ourselves mostly, you know, for the most part, by a horrific margin. But there was a chimpanzees that had found that they had killed a gorilla, I believe, in the Congo. So they had actually gone to war with another species of ape over territory, and you know the horrific kind of things that the chimps will do to each other. They basically commit genocide against each other. They'll try to kill the alphas and kill the whole tribe. And it's like, that's eerily disturbing, because that's what we do to each other. We do that all the time throughout history. So you see these parallels, but I think when it comes to the Bigfoot topic in particular, as I mentioned earlier, the thing that fascinates me probably the most is those parallel behaviors where you have something like the smell. People in maybe a minor percentage of Bigfoot encounters, so maybe less than 50%, there's a smell described, right? You've got the whole skunk ape. Now, is that just because it lives in a swampy environment, it smells? Because, I mean, you've been out in the woods for extended periods of time, and you don't smell yourself until somebody else from the outside smells you. And Jonathan in the chat probably can talk about how Eli and I smelled, and Tate, after our time at Bluff Creek, we're stuffed in a car together, and he was like, I could smell you guys. You might want to jump in the creek today. You know, that just happens. But gorillas can actually control their scent glands, unlike humans. Imagine if when agitated or angry, you could release BO. That's basically what gorillas do. And then you have the wood knocking stuff. And, you know, there aren't many sightings where people report seeing a Bigfoot wood knocking. I've heard of a few, but not that many. But then again, that's been reported for a while. And then you have chimps use that as a form of communication. They'll throw rocks at trees, creating that kind of noise. So you have a few of these kinds of things that I think some of those masks, as we were talking about earlier, the tribal masks that show the teeth baring and the where, you know, chimps will put their lip up when they're agitated. And that's something pretty, you know, uniquely kind of chimp-like behavior, right? And that's something that some Bigfoot witnesses report as well, baring of the teeth or a smile, which for apes, a smile is not, oh, hey, I'm happy to see you. It's, I'm going to rip your throat out. And as Jonathan says, he says, Oliver the chimp gives me nightmares. Yeah, remember that story of the chimp who ripped the lady's face off, ate her own face?
Yeah.
She raised him like in Planet of the Apes. She had raised this chimp, and then he just went, you know, still an animal, went crazy and decided to rip her face off. Pretty disturbing.
Yeah, I tried to do some undergrad work at the zoo around here, and I was emailing them. Like I was pretty persistent, so I don't blame them. But they basically said, "Listen, kid, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Like this is not. You can't do this. Don't even bother asking us." So, I mean, it's dangerous. They've had people come in there, I guess, in the past, and I looked into kind of why they're not letting people do that. I guess someone got their finger bit off. I mean, this is no joke. Like they're not docile creatures. They're not, you know, like
they can be, but they have that switch that can be.
Yeah. I mean, remember the grizzly guy? They were docile until they ripped him and ate him. You know, like that's wildlife. And that's, you know, I have a definitely healthy respect for wildlife. I mean, I've run into moose out in the woods and in Maine. I came around a blind corner on the Appalachian Trail. I mean, we're almost done. And we're like in Maine, like cool. We're getting there right before the 100-mile wilderness. And it was, you know, a mom and a calf. And I just, you know, you have to respect wildlife, man, because they don't care. There's none of this like touchy feely stuff we all get into on our podcasts about ethics and feel good and who should be doing what. I mean, these things don't care. They want to be safe and left alone. And, you know, that was one of the most terrifying experiences I've had in my life. And I've had, you know, black bears outside my tent at night, walking around. I've had, you know, the typical backpacking stories you hear on the Appalachian Trail, but running into that moose, like, I'm not kidding. I mean, I was within 5 feet just coming around a blind corner with a mom and a calf. And I was like, I could die. Like it's the only time I've ever thought I could die right now. I could be dead.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and even deer, like in the rut, I mean, it's very unlikely, but a buck, I mean,
they can get pretty testy,
aggressive male, like when he's full on, like ready for some action, like you've seen those videos of dudes just getting messed up by bucks. Like wildlife doesn't play on our rules. We all have these rules in society where we're like, oh, you can't do this, or this is your consequence. A bear will eat you. Like there's no, like if you make it mad or do the wrong thing, you're gonna get in trouble. So like, you know, I don't if Sasquatch is real, I don't think there's any reason that it wouldn't be. Like you hear these stories of gentle giant and this and that, like that's total BS if I ever heard anything. Because like if they were mad at you and you were not like picking up on these signs, like get out of here, I think you'd be in serious trouble.
For sure. And I think that a lot of the more aggressive encounters people have, and I've heard this time and time again, the idea that if this thing wanted to kill me, it could have. And, you know, obviously we don't hear a lot of the stories that people get murdered. If that's the case, you don't have a witness to relay the story, right? But I think
if you're not there,
I don't think that happens all that often because it's, you know, there are some gruesome Sasquatch stories out there, but for the most part, it seems that these things, if they're operating in the MO that we assume they are, they probably don't, they know that, you know, killing humans can probably cause an adverse reaction. I mean, other apes, they know how they can learn our behavior and know when certain things are you know, smart and not to do. And, you know, as Cornell puts it, Sasquatch are in no way friendly forest people. There's a lot of people in the Bigfoot community. They do think that, you know, I talked to a lot of people who have been out there with some pretty high powered weapons and still said this probably wouldn't be enough for something like that. But I mean, you talk about moose. I think a lot of people that live in parts of the country where there are no moose, and we have them all the time up here. I mean, just where I was camping this weekend, there was not a single place I went to that I didn't find moose sign. And there's been times I've seen 5 or 6 in a trip, and I spent all day yesterday driving logging roads for 5 hours, didn't see a single moose, saw a lot of sign, but you're out there and you have an experience with a moose. And I've had a run in Maine as well, where basically ran right past our tent, a mother and a calf, and you could see the silhouette, and I'm gripping my shotgun, kind of saying, please keep going. Do not, because you love, it's amazing to see these critters out there, but from a healthy kind of respectful distance, right? You don't want to be in that range where you realize, you could be in danger. And I think that happens to a lot of people coincidentally, like you said, you just kind of came around the bend and happened to be there. And I've talked to other people who've had very similar encounters. It just kind of happens. But I think it puts into perspective how wild some of these places in the wilderness still are. Yeah. We're coddled now. And I think this is a great point. We've talked about this off air as well, a lot about how nowadays people have it really easy. They don't really do anything challenging, and you try to put yourself into situations where you're challenging yourself. I mean, I was out there camping alone this weekend. A lot of people would be like, oh, why'd you go alone? And I wanted to pick the most remote spot I could basically get into with my car and, set up there. And it's like, I could have easily gone somewhere a little bit more camper or tourist friendly, but that's not really a challenge. You have to get over that initial fear of knowing there could be anything surrounding you. It's just you and your own wits in that moment. And I think a lot more people have to kind of put themselves to the test. But unfortunately, our society is just a lot of coddling and a lot of not enough challenges. But boy, there's a lot going on in the chat and the comments. We're getting some trolling going on. We had like some guy must have had like 5 burner accounts. So we had Justin Chernopesky in here. We had Steve from How to Hunt. We had Dave Politis. Yeah, I've been blocking people because there was some trolling going on. But Rebecca Slick adds a good comment. Honey Badger don't care. Regards to the animal. That's awesome. What's going on, Rebecca? She is awesome. Kevin says, apparently chimps are kind of okay until they reach a certain age. Then they become little killers. Yeah, that is. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just like going from a child to an adult. You just get beat down by life and you could easily become a killer. I don't know.
I feel that, man. I'm right there with you.
Mothman 46 says the only time Bigfoot scared me was when he stole Alex's beef jerky.
Ooh, that's a big mistake. I wouldn't do that.
Don't mess with the jerky, man. Come on. Who doesn't like their jerky? We got my boy Carrick, Carrick is awesome. He does a lot of he's actually studying, is it archaeology now or anthropology? I know he's one of the two. He's an awesome guy over at Crash Course Cryptozoology, good friend of the show. He says there is a type of baboon-like primate in Africa that has been shown to have anxious reactions to the sound of domestic dogs, but not wild dogs. An example of primates adapting to human presence. That is super fascinating. Whenever I need something like that, I can go to Kara because the guy has, his mind is just, it's amazing. We'll put it that way. Absolutely interesting. Yeah, that's totally interesting. You think about a lot of reports Sasquatch with dogs. Some people say it's either a positive or a negative reaction. I mean, New Hampshire Sasquatch has a report of a lady up in Mount Cabot in the White Mountains, one of the 4,000 footers, getting her dog killed by what she claimed was a Sasquatch. And the Fish and Game people kind of told her off. It was a bear, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. I've heard of a lot of kind of mixed reactions. But anyway, we have a lot of questions. So what do you say? I cannot believe an hour has already flown by. This is crazy. Just like when we did your show, it just zooms by.
Keeps going.
I'm usually like, 20, 30 minutes in, I'll start the questions, but totally forgot about that this time. So
sorry, everyone.
No, it's cool. Let's see. I know there were some music questions. Okay. This is Andy VL asks, what is Paul's opinion of the possible presence of mountain lions in Michigan? Thanks, Andy.
Well, since Alex has an amazing documentary about mountain lions, I don't think it's entirely impossible that they could be up there. I mean, where I'm at, not mountain lion specific, where I'm at in Northwest Ohio, I mean, I live in rural, I'll just imagine Nebraska. Okay. Like this is where I live. And there was a report 2 years ago, like right by my house, of a black bear. So like, I don't think it's entirely impossible that, because these animals used to have these home ranges. It is our fault 100% as human beings that they are not in these ranges. They like historically have been all over the US. Like black bears are still up in northern Michigan. They're not where I'm at right here in Ohio, not in southern Michigan. There's these little pockets, but they're in southern Ohio again. So like there's these weird rural pockets where we've just wiped everything out. And I don't think it would be entirely impossible for a mountain lion to be in Michigan because they have been there. I think it could be possible. There could be a few stray offs, just like you said in your documentary. Do they have viable like breeding populations? I would doubt it, but I would not put it past it. I mean, and also I hope I never find out, because if that's one animal I do not want to cross in the wilderness, man. And my friend Brad, who is like one of the first people on my podcast, used to be a guide out west. He owns a fly shop here locally in the Northwest Ohio area now. And he told me, coming face to face with a mountain lion, he said it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to him. And I'm just like, you know, that's a thing I don't want to come, especially one that doesn't, you know, isn't belong in that area, quote unquote, belong in that area. Is probably pretty hungry and not really thrilled to not have anybody, his homies around or something. You know, I don't know how mountain lions live, but you know.
Well, that goes back to kind of what we're talking about, people thinking that, you know, apes are cute and cuddly. I've spent a lot of time, obviously, through Lions of the East, and I spent a lot of time at these wildlife centers that had these rehabilitated sort of mountain lions that were raised from orphans after their mother was killed out west by hunter, and they were put up, you know, adoption, and they get put into zoos and whatever. And, you know, you spend time looking at them, and I'm like, man, this is behaving just like cats I've interacted with, you know, domestic cats. It's just a large, cuter version, but you realize this thing would probably take any moment to try and kill you and eat you if it had the chance. Maybe not the ones in the exhibit because they're well fed, but even handlers that have worked with them for years are not interacting with them close quarters. It's all, there's a metal bar in between for a reason. They'll feed them the mouse or whatever. And it's just amazing because you lose that. And I think, you know, humans with our cartoons and everything like that, we anthropomorphize kind of all sorts of species, right? Give them human-like qualities, but that's not the case, right? These animals will not hesitate, and we are on the menu to some of them. But yeah, mountain lions, I'm absolutely amazed by. I have a huge respect for them. I've never run into one, but Rebecca, actually, who commented earlier about the honey badgers, had an amazing experience with her and the other Olympic project people out in the Olympic Peninsula back in April. And I've talked about it, where we were hiking in this area where there's been a lot of Bigfoot reports. And right in the trail, we found fresh scuff marks from mountain lion digging, and found these amazing tracks in the mud, and got to cast some of them. And just such a cool experience knowing that you're virtually, you know, maybe 20, 30 minutes behind an adult mountain lion male. It's just kind of going about its daily life. And you realize it's good to have a 357 on your hip in those kinds of instances. And you know, recently out in Colorado and Utah, same thing, knowing that they could be anywhere. But, you know, it just kind of depends on what you're used to dealing with. And you just got to have a healthy respect for them. So yeah, we could talk about mountain lions, I'm sure, for a while too. But there was one question earlier, I think from Tate, and the chat won't let me see it anymore, but it was, he's a musician as well. And he was wondering kind of what your musical inspirations were for behind some of the kind of music that you like to do.
That's a great question. Real nerdy stuff like aliens and just cyborgs and all this weird stuff. That the band that you referenced earlier, Astralborne, it's one of those things where, and this has probably been with all of us or a lot of people that are watching or in this chat right now. When you're young, you have ambitions and dreams to do this thing. I always just looked up to these heavy metal musicians, and then you do the thing. You go out on the road and you learn this isn't that great. You know, it's like, you know, a lot of people probably say that to you. You're like, oh, you're a filmmaker and you're so awesome. You get to do this. And like, yeah, it is awesome. It's fun. You get to do a lot of stuff, but it's also a lot of work. And like the music now is like an outlet for all like the dorky stuff I'm into. I mean, I got a big X-Files poster back here, and I just love like sci-fi and all this kind of stuff. And we write really just real like we're all a bunch of nerds. We just write dorky heavy metal music about aliens and weird like topics like that, and it's just fun stuff. And it's like you know, like metal is pretty much, whether like musicians will admit it or not, like a bunch of nerds. Like everybody loves Dungeons and Dragons and like I just like one of my favorite bands ever, Mastodon, has like they have a song called Circle of Sasquatch, and my Bigfoot tattoo is actually an old t-shirt design they had of a Bigfoot, and it's just cool. Dorky nature metal. And you know, that's a lot of my musical inspiration is just like dorky sci-fi stuff. So sorry, that was I'm really bad at answering questions.
No, dude, I answer time, man. No, I love it. That's awesome. Well, there you go. I mean, Tate, he likes to play as well, and you know, some of our stuff. Awesome. When we were out in Oregon for Beyond the Trail, he was the one playing the bass guitar.
I remember that, man.
Yeah, because just trying out different techniques out in the woods. You know, why not? But also another good friend here, Jonathan, says, great show. What does Paul think of Lloyd Pye's theories of evolution? Has he heard them?
I can't say I have heard of them. If you can always hit me up on, Instagram or something, and you could enlighten me. I have not heard of that. No, but
Oh,
I don't
that'd
know
be
if you know
awesome.
either, Alex. I'm not familiar with it.
Not a whole lot. I'll definitely have to talk to Jonathan about that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have to look more into that. But
Yeah. Send me some
no,
info. I'll look it up.
appreciate the question, Jonathan. So
Yeah.
Cornell, No Such Thing podcast keeps egging on. Talk about man of war. I don't meet many man of warriors. So the
Oh,
floor is yours, Senator.
here we go. God, dude. It was a total off chance. I went. So every year, it just started last year, but my good friend Derek York, he's got a podcast. I feel like I'm just plugging everybody's podcast. Sorry, I don't mean to do that on your
Oh,
show. It's just he
we love the cross
yeah,
promoting.
Derek is a great guy. He runs a podcast called Impact Outdoors, and he's just an outdoorsman, man. He grew up in he's gonna kill me. I can't remember. South, north of Texas.
Somewhere down there.
Yeah, and Oklahoma. I'm sorry, Oklahoma. Yeah, he grew up in Oklahoma, and he moved to Texas. He's a fisherman. He owns a charter boat. He works for the government. He's like a natural resource officer or something like that. I'm butchering it, but great guy. He started a podcasting conference for like hunters and stuff, and I was on his show. He was on my show. We chat a lot, and I fly down to Texas in April of this year. And I just show up. I bring all my camera equipment. I made a little mini doc about our adventure turkey hunting, my first time turkey hunting. And yeah, I show up, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, I know you're in a metal band. The lead singer of Manowar is going to be there." I'm like, "You're so full of crap." Like, I thought they were just like pulling my leg. I'm the new guy. I'm not like really like in their group, because they all live down in Texas. Or Eric, as he's known, Lou Marullo as his real name, he lives up in New York. And
Right.
so we go. He's good friends with Chester Moore, and Chester Moore was on my podcast, and
Dude.
it's just a circle.
Did you? Oh,
And
by the way, Southern Fried Bigfoot. Chester's in
love
that. I
it.
think I mentioned it to you.
So good. Yeah, I watched it the day you told me about it, and I immediately texted him. I was like, every time I turn around, everybody's like, Chester, Chester, Chester. I was like, I didn't even know I was friends with a famous guy, but him and Lou or Eric Adams are great friends, and he brought Eric down to hunt, and I sit down at this. I'm nobody, dude. I just have an outdoors podcast on YouTube, basically. Like, I'm not like a celebrity of any standard or anything. And I'm like just stone faced, man. Like, oh my God, this guy sells out arenas across the world. Okay. This is like me. This would be like a girl in the 90s meeting Brad Pitt or something, as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's just like, oh my God. And nicest guy ever. Only dude there besides a few, like one or two other guys that would drink beer with me. We talked hunting. We didn't even talk music hardly about on the podcast, because this dude is a insanely great outdoorsman.
Awesome.
He's written books on hunting. He's got audiobooks on hunting. He's got a resume longer than probably half of us on the chat as an outdoorsman. And he's also a rock star.
That is
And
so
to have
cool.
to have the opportunity to talk to him on my podcast and just like hear stories of a guy who hunts all over the United States. He's got stories on stories. Nice dude. You would never, if you met him and didn't know he was in Manowar, like arguably one of the biggest and best heavy metal bands of all time, you would just
Right.
be like, this is a dude. He was no
Just some
rock
guy.
star
Yeah.
ego, just a
That is so
dude.
cool.
Watched him eat crawfish that was super spicy for the first time. Him and I were suffering together. Like, he's a little few hours east of me in New York, and I'm in, 10 hours east of me, and I'm in Ohio. Like, essentially, Northerners don't essentially eat spicy food all the time. They were
Spicy,
razzing
yeah.
us so bad. So we had that Northern guy connection, and yeah,
That's
he's
so
just an
cool.
awesome guy. So I hope that it was a good answer to your question. Yeah. Lou is
The small
is
world.
is a
No,
dude.
Cornell definitely seems very, very happy. He's putting a lot of comments in there. He says Adams is the best metal singer. Tate also asked, since we're on the music topic, he says, is Paul a fan of the band Ween?
I can't say that I know much about them. I'm sorry.
No
I
worries.
listen
Tate knows
to
a
really
lot of
weird.
interesting music stuff. So
Yeah, I listen to like bluegrass, Americana, and death metal. It's a weird combo.
there you go.
I don't understand it myself. So,
Well, that's awesome. That's it's small world, with the connections between the outdoors and, like you said, Chester Moore, the Bigfoot stuff. It's everywhere, and that's what I love about it. And that's why I think it's so cool what you're doing with your podcast, and what I've seen a few other
thanks.
people, not too many, that are into the outdoors doing a little bit more of the kind of looking into Bigfoot stuff. And that's the kind of audience I'm trying to appeal to as well, and say, hey, look, Bigfoot is not just all crazy, kooky drama and weird people and insane people. There's totally normal people. We just like getting out in the woods, but we also think that maybe there's something interesting out there that is waiting to be discovered. So I do like that appeal, and I love that kind of that crossover. And Carrick says American death grass. Someone's got to trademark that.
Hey, if you know how to play, hit me up. We'll make it happen. I got
right on.
I got a banjo. I'm not good at it, but I got one. I can't say that it would go.
That would be a very unique sound for sure.
Bigfoot American death metal bluegrass.
Dude, let's go.
That's a whole new genre. Never been done before.
So this was a question that popped up a little earlier, and I thank you, Jeremiah, for sending it back. Bigfoot Society, Jeremiah, he asked, Paul, what was your through hiker name on the AT? So for folks that don't know, on the Appalachian Trail, you guys get, hiker names. And can you explain a little bit about that to somebody that might not know?
Yeah. So it's just like a cultural part of the Appalachian Trail. You get a name, and it's, from my understanding of it and having lived through it, it kind of is just like you kind of shed your old, I don't say you're old. You shed who you are in like your 9 to 5 life. Like I'm not Paul Fuzinski on the trail. I was Bronco, and that comes from my nature, I guess, as a person. I can be a little wild sometimes. I can be a little,
bucking Bronco.
Bucking Bronco, like a horse. You think of a horse and you think of like, oh, nice tame horse, you go for a ride. But a Bronco is like, can be just a wild creature, just doing its own thing. And yeah, that was my trail name. It's really weird when I run into old friends who've thru hiked or have them on the show to hear that name. It's like hearing it's just like, I don't know. It's like hearing something that you haven't heard in a super long time. You're like, whoa, I haven't heard that name in a century.
Name or something.
Yeah. My trail name was Bronco. So everybody keeps telling me those new Broncos just came out, that they re-released them, and they're like, you need to get one, man. You need to get a Bronco. And I was like, well, I don't have $60,000 to spend on a car right now. So I appreciate the sentiment, but yeah, Bronco it is. And the trail culture is cool. And I think it's a fun place to be. I'm one of the outdoors guys, and I think I'm in the minority at this point. Like, I'm so sick of, and the outdoors community can be like the Bigfoot community. It becomes a measuring contest of who's the lightest and fastest. And like, I hate that. I just want to have people get outside and have fun. And, I kind of like say I'm no longer part of the quote unquote backpacking community, because all they want to do is argue. And it's like kind of like the big,
it's every community. Yeah. And they all have offshoots, and it's all over the place.
But yeah, the Appalachian Trail is a sweet culture. And I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you ever get the opportunity to do something like that, even if it's only a week or two, through hiking is a
section hike or something.
Yeah. Don't through hike unless you really want. If it's like a passion you have, do it. You miss so much. You miss like all the beautiful scenery because you're just have a goal in mind to get through, and you don't get time to appreciate the outdoors. So I would suggest section hiking or just going out for week at a time.
That's something I've toiled with, ever since I really got back into it back in high school and started doing hiking and doing the New Hampshire 48 4,000 footers. It's very goal oriented. Sure, I enjoyed a lot of the sites along the way, but I've always told myself, I feel like the AT, you just miss. Not only are you missing the nature, because I've heard this from multiple people, and I interact with a lot of AT people, especially hiking up in the White Mountains in that kind of July to September window when the people are making that final push. If they're going Nobo northbound towards Katahdin, they're in that final area. So we always end up seeing them in the shelters, or we run across them. I've given lifts people to McDonald's in Gorham and other towns.
You're a hero.
Times. They buy you food, and it's like it works out great for everybody, But no, I like helping them out because I've been in those spots too, and it's such a dedication. I respect people who have done the whole AT and even the PCT, and then I know there's the third one, which is a little the mid coast
CDT,
CDT, which is basically from Mexico to Canada. It takes some courage to do that, and I've done the section hikes and 2-week long backpacking trips. And that's kind of like where I like to keep it. I don't know. It's I just feel like it would be such a big loss of time in terms of all the other things going on in your life. And as I've heard many times, people in the AT say, there's never a good time to do it, right? It's just, you either do it, it's like, oh, do it while you're young, or do it when you retire, do it before you start, after college. There's never a good time to do it. You just kind of have to do it. So I respect it. I probably wouldn't choose to do it. I prefer kind of more of the doses, or even if I've talked about even spending, months at a time out in a certain area, but that's just living. You're not hiking 10, 15, 20 miles a day with a goal in mind in a window, right? You're just kind of more settled into an area. So absolutely.
I'm still paying for it, man. Trust me. To be after something like that.
Yeah. I mean, if the physical stuff I can imagine as well. And I know a lot of people who've gotten pretty messed up and who have, started with a northbound, then switched and started southbound after they got hurt after recovering. So it's, do it however is best, for you, like do you. And some people do it a certain way, and that's cool. But as long as you're getting out there and enjoying. But going back to what you're talking about, the communities and all the bickering, and I watch a lot of the other outdoors communities. I'm really into primarily firearms, backpacking, off-roading as well. I watch a lot.
You're always strapped.
Yeah, and I'm always watching the stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have some kind of protection out in the woods, especially in big cat country or moose country. But I watch a lot of the overlanding stuff too. People just doing overland treks, and it's cool. There's so many different communities. I think that Bigfooting is, we are trying to push a little bit of the envelope scientifically, but in a lot of ways, it's become a subculture. And you have, within cryptozoology is a subculture, but it's also part of the outdoors because you have a lot of overlap with folks like yourself that are into the Bigfoot stuff, into the outdoors. And I really like that. And I think that's a pretty solid place to kind of be, because as people are, even the chat were saying, there's a lot of crazies out there in the Bigfoot world. There is, unfortunately, but who cares? I mean, there's plenty of normal people. I've met overwhelmingly normal and nice, well-adjusted people who are into this, have a passing interest, or who have just simply had an experience that has changed them to a point where they just can't look back. And, they think that this thing is out there. They know it's out there based on what they've seen. I'm not going to tell them they didn't experience that. I'd love to get to the bottom of it though. And I know a lot of people certainly would as well. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, I would 100% agree.
Totally. Yeah, man. So, I mean, with the podcast, right? Is there, aside from the Bigfoot stuff, is there a particular area you like to talk about more than others? Like, I know you said you talk to all sorts of people, but do you prefer talking to people about hunting or backpacking over like fishing or something like that? Or is there a particular area that really catches your interest?
It's funny, that question, because it literally depends on what I'm into at any given moment.
Fair enough.
I always say that I'm surprised anybody listens to it, because it's just so all over the place. Like, one week I was really interested in the local, or 1 month I was super interested in the local habitats. And we have where I live, there's a park called Oak Openings, and it's a globally rare habitat. It's this weird mix, and nobody knows about it. And there's all these the short, it used to be the glacial shores of Lake Erie. It's probably 20 miles from Lake Erie or something like that. And I got super interested in this, and I wanted to know. So I hit up one of the professors at the college who's the local expert on this, and I had him on, and it was awesome. The dude was hilarious. We talked about Oak Openings, and I had his friend on, and we delved down this rabbit hole. And then a week later, I was like, oh, I want to talk about mountain biking. Sweet. And I like mountain biking. So I had somebody on, and I had, it's just weird. And I'm sure you find this too with when you do your show. I mean, eventually you come across people and you kind of go down these holes of maybe weeks at a time or months at a time, where you just go down these paths, and then they kind of fizzle out. You go down these new paths with different people. And it's just to fulfill my ADHD brain on how I view the outdoors. Right now I'm super into hunting. I'll bet my next guest probably is either me talking about hunting with my buddy who's out there with me, or I could maybe talk to somebody from a local conservation organization, or talk to you, or maybe somebody on this podcast wants to do a Bigfoot podcast. Just whatever happens to be at my interest at the time. But like I said, my main topics of interest, I would say, are I really love long distance sport, not to say just backpacking. Sure. I've talked to people who've done long distance kayaking. I've talked to people, who've done long distance mountain biking, road biking, I would honestly say for me, there's so many backpacking podcasts that I honestly like don't have that much interest in like being niched into that backpacking
Yeah.
podcast world. Like I just really like to explore the outdoors. I want to learn about pack rafting. That's always something interesting to me. There's huge organizations out there. I'm not a huge gearhead, so I don't really talk about gear, which probably like I have people like, oh, if you talked about gear, your downloads would be higher. I was like, I don't care. It doesn't interest me. I feel like it would be insincere to like myself and my audience to just talk about like, oh yes, the newest Osprey backpack. Can't wait. Like, cool. Like, I don't care. I'm more of a just like get out there and do it. You go to Walmart and buy a $200 mountain bike if you want a mountain bike and then whatever,
Just
learn.
go
If you
for
really
it.
get into it, go for it. If you want to, I'm super into video too. And like, I just started out with a crappy like $500 Nikon, and now I have like super expensive junk that I'm like just super into it. So I'll talk to photographers. You're a videographer. You make documentaries. That's interesting to me. And it happens to be in the
We could
outdoors,
talk
which is
about that all
amazing.
night too.
Yeah, I'm game. I don't have anywhere to be, but yeah, I don't want to
No,
keep
for
people up till
sure.
4 a.m. either. But
No, it's awesome. No, you're right. And as TC Glasgow puts in the comments, like anything goes, and that's awesome. I mean, I feel I'm the same way. My interest one week will be about this obscure Civil War somewhere, and then it'll be about really interested in this part of Utah. Let's find out everything we can find out about this mountain range. Like it's just all over the place. There's no rhyme or
yeah,
reason.
yeah,
But I think Carrick puts it nicely as well here. He says, "What an open and healthy approach to the world to be able to extend your interest widely and equally. That is an ability many of us in the field are still developing. I know I am at least." Awesome. I mean, Carrick's one of the smartest dudes I know. He's a
thank
real
you.
awesome guy for sure. Cornell says you guys are inspiring the hell out of me. Hey man, as long
Never thought I'd hear that.
that's awesome. And I Cornell's
you.
a great guy, and I've known him for quite a while. And I always say, even with the Bigfoot stuff, because like I said, when I get non-Bigfoot, I'm almost more interested when I get non-Bigfoot people telling me that they really enjoyed the stuff because it inspired them to get out and outdoors, or kind of let them know what an area looks like. That for me is one of the best things, just inspiring people to get outside and enjoy, whether you're doing Bigfoot research or not. The world's crazy enough. We need some outs. Like when I went this weekend, it was just me getting away from the screens, just a man in the woods, enjoying the time out there and looking for moose and that sort of stuff. And sometimes that's just what you need. And a lot of people aren't really into that, but I feel like a lot of the people that do watch the outdoors related stuff are probably like that. So as long as we can get more people out there, I mean, I think that's a win-win.
Well, and I have a real like, what do I want to say? Like I have a very different viewpoint on how things operate, because a lot of the podcasts I do, and this all sprung. I used to have this like local TV show about like the outdoors, and it was like a fun thing. I just called up all my friends who did outdoor stuff around here, and we like took a mountain bike ride. I never went mountain biking. We took a kayak trip. I'd hardly done any kayaking, and we did all these like big dumb TV stunts to like make an entertaining show. But I've always been the punching bag. Like I never know what I'm doing. Like the first time I rode a mountain bike, I literally rode with a crew of professional mountain bikers, and I was in the middle of the pack. And you want to talk about scared? Like you think running into a Bigfoot scary? That was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. I thought they would not slow down. I was like panting. I was like 35, 40 pounds heavier. I was like dying out there. And they were like, nope, just go. And they're like doing jumps and stuff. I mean, I thought I was going to die. I don't know how I stayed on the bike the whole time. And I want to give people a
You got pushed,
Yeah. I want to give people that realistic approach to the outdoors, because I get discouraged as a person when I watch these shows where every time they go out and they get a deer and it's a 8-point, 10-point buck and it's a massive, and they always get the prize, and that doesn't happen. I've been out hunting a ton. I've spent 5 years hunting. I've learned it all on my own. Like I just wanted to learn. I feel like it's a vital part of humanity. And like, that's not to say I love killing stuff. There's a big difference. So don't get offended by this, people.
No,
I know a lot of people are very turned off by hunting, but like, I feel like it's a primal part of our existence. I mean, we've only just stopped hunting, and I don't want to get on a soapbox, but it's like, I had these expectations where I felt like crap because I spent my first time out ever. I shot a deer. Dumb luck. Beginners. That's the definition of beginner's luck. And last 4 years in a row, I haven't even seen any deer. So like I've put out a few episodes on my YouTube channel of just me like sucking at hunting. And yeah, they don't get a lot of views because nobody wants to see you suck.
They want to
But
see
that's what
the end product, right? Yeah.
yeah, and like I know that's a terrible marketing approach, but I'm not into marketing. I'm here to like I just want to tell my truth and like
Tell the
let
story.
people know that it's okay to not be good at it. I'm still terrible at mountain biking, but I just did an adventure race last weekend where it was like 20 miles of mountain biking, you know? It's like whatever, man. It's fun to just be and do new things and be excited, and I want to give people that realistic approach. And when I talk to experts who've done cool stuff, I'm always like I just learned a ton. And like it's
Right.
almost like a selfish thing for me. Like I get to learn from people like you who get to do this cool stuff for a living, and then we go out and we learn from people who are professional explorers and stuff. Like I don't have any ground to stand on, and they're willing to give me their time. I just think it's amazing to like be accepted by these people, and all I do is send them an email like, "Hey, I know you've never heard of me, but will you talk to me about this cool nature stuff?" And they're always stoked to do it. So, yeah,
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
fun.
I think you bring up an awesome point, which is especially showing your failures, showing things that you haven't done right in the field. So many times, I think people, when they get online, they're so afraid of being shown to be doing something wrong or that they made a
Yeah.
mistake. But it's a huge thing to admit you were wrong. I mean, that happens in the Bigfoot community a lot, where people they'll miscategorize supposed evidence, or something will be proven to be something else, and they just can't let it go, and they always destroy their credibility along the way. More than a handful of examples I can think of. And to have the humility to admit you're wrong, or I didn't know what I was doing at the time, that's totally fine. That's part of learning. And I think and I'm not trying to like parallel with what we do with Beyond the Trail, but and I say this all the time, we don't, every time we're out there, we don't have stuff happen. We show that. If we don't
Yeah.
have things happening, we will show you we had no supposed Bigfoot activity, and people get annoyed and they're like, blah, blah, blah. There's no evidence shown in this documentary. And it's like, well, part of it is the search, right? That's a big part of it. But I think that's important,
Yeah.
is just showing that, it's a good way to get people into it. Because a lot of times I've seen this happen in a lot of online communities, whether it be, backpacking, firearms, anything. People will go in and they'll ask a dumb question. They'll get berated by all these armchair experts, and almost insulted to the point where, well, people aren't going to ask questions. No, you got to have an open forum where people are allowed to kind of talk about it and ask these certain things. And you get entrenched in a community, and you become so used to hearing certain things that when new things come in, as innocent as they might be, they're either taken as being trolling, or they're just, oh, this person doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. Yeah, they might not, but why not, guide them into an area where they can say, okay, now they can get more into it. Right. But yeah, that's part of it with, and like you said, with hunting, especially, it's one of those things that's, it's a special experience. And I think going back to that coddling of society, it's really only the past 50, 60 years that we haven't been hunting in the scales that we have all throughout history.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, and people get very offended by hunting, and there's a lot of clickbaity stuff out there, all hunters are evil and this kind of stuff, but they don't know about some of the programs that are put in place, and hunting organizations, all that stuff. And I don't want to get too much into that, but
Yeah, absolutely.
it's an intimate process. Like, if you have to take an animal's life away, it is definitely not something to be taken lightly. I mean, it's
sad, man. It
sad. I mean, I've had to do that with the deer that was still alive, side of the road, kind of roadkill. And it's it's a process where it's like you're kind of saying, well, I'd rather you are dispatched easily instead of having to suffer, and get ripped apart by a mountain lion while you're still alive, or whatever the case may be. And it's another thing, a lot of the teachings that the Native Americans talked about, other cultures as well, doing some sort of a ritual or something when they take the life of an animal, it's giving itself essentially for your sustenance. And I think that's the difference between that type of hunting and what people think of hunting is, exterminating all the buffalo or killing a lion just for the sport of it. When, there's a lot of people that hunt for totally different reasons. I mean,
well, and
it depends where you go too.
It's a parallel with Bigfooting as well. Like the community, like, how many people, when you bring up Bigfoot or hunters, they automatically think big fat rednecks drinking beer, being belligerent, just doubt. Like, that's not the case from what I've seen. There's great people out in both communities, and I'm seeing a new wave of thought and like almost like philosophies on hunting and Bigfooting at the same time, like paralleling each other with people who are like coming at this with intelligent thought and reason and like why this is super important. And I think that's a great direction, because like it's these things are all primal to who we are as like as a
Yeah.
species, as a human community. It's just like these things are, whether, you know, hunting is for sustenance or whatever, as I think it should be,
Right.
if you're doing it. And like with Bigfooting, like this what you would call a mystery or mythology has been part of American culture since before white people showed up. Like that, like Connor corrected me on my podcast. Is like, people never started talking about Bigfoot to the 70s. And he's just like, yeah, that's where you're wrong, buddy. And like, you know, I got
Yeah.
schooled, and that's fine. Like, I mean, I knew there were Native American stories and stuff and things along that nature, but like in general, like that's what people think of, but it's totally wrong. And like, you know, it's great to have those stories, and that like Native Americans were always hunting. White
Yeah.
people over in Europe were always hunting. I mean, that's how you had to survive
Agriculture.
until recently. Within
Well,
like
they couldn't just
our
go to the store
grandparents'
and just buy
lifetimes.
some steaks and take them out and cook them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't, and that, I think a lot of people, and again, that goes back to that coddling. They don't know the level at which they're basically being coddled, you know, and what our ancestors would have done a couple hundred years ago. They were way more hardcore and lived so much closer to the land than we do. You know, if you don't know the process of how, you know, what do they say like that? I know it's kind of referring to journalism, but the concept of, don't just give me the sausage, don't tell me how it's made, kind of thing, because people might get disgusted by the process. And I think people take issue with, you know, a lot of the farming practice and everything, and factory farming. That's not, I'm not really, you know, talking about that. I'm talking about something else, but it's part of it. I think it's just part of it, the way we have it so easy now. And getting back to those roots, like you said, whether it's hunting or pushing yourself to do some mountaineering or something like that, you're connecting with your ancestors, essentially, who had to do this kind of stuff, had to fight for their basic existence. They couldn't just take it all for granted. And I think this past year and a half maybe have put people in a little bit more of a position to realize that, you know, these things might not always be there, which I think is good. And that's another community, that kind of prepping kind of world. I don't think too many people are laughing at them anymore. I mean, there's some kooky ones for sure, but a lot of it is just common sense. A lot of it, like I see that, and as somebody with Eastern European roots, a lot of the stuff that I see in the prepping community, that's like been common knowledge, because my ancestors had to fight off the Ottoman Empire, the Nazis, the communists, anyone you can imagine. And this was just sort of, they were pickling stuff and putting stuff aside for the winter irregardless. So I think it's just really interesting, but we need to connect more with nature, especially as we go full tech, and we're seeming to kind of really, it's really, we're getting merged with this stuff in a pretty insane way. But
dude, and well, that's why I think what you're doing is super important. With like, you're not only going out there with and making films and talking about this in like a logical and scientific way, like it's just getting, like, when I see the Bigfoot documentaries and I see people like you out there in the Small Town Monsters crews, and a lot of the people that are probably you friends with you on your YouTube channels, I've probably seen a lot of your guys' documentaries and stuff as well. And I would always think, these are my people. Like, these are hardcore dudes and women going out there in the woods, roughing it, like taking the, like, just, it's not easy to go out there. It's not always fun. And like, everybody thinks camping is, especially out here in the Midwest, camping, sitting on a lake, drinking beer, yelling, fishing, you know, which it can be, which is fun. I'm not going to say anything bad against that, but like, you know, you guys are out there are hoofing it and doing cool stuff, and trying to, you have a passion about the outdoors, regardless of the Bigfoot or not. I think that's why I relate to you guys so much. It's so cool to see that, because I don't see that around me very often. And it's awesome to have that community.
Totally. And I think that's part of why I see eye to eye with someone like you. I mean, not only am I into that other outdoor stuff, but I think there's a lot of there's a lot of crossover between people in this field, you know, especially that are really getting into it, and people who are into the outdoors, because we're essentially enjoying the same sort of areas, right? And we're getting into these same spots. And you could very well, like, you know, Jonathan, you mentioned on 46 podcast, when he shared his story about just hiking, he wasn't looking for anything Bigfoot related when he had rocks thrown at him multiple times. You know, that was something probably in the back of his mind. You know, in the same area. So it's just, these things happen. And, you know, if we can kind of approach it in that way, I think it's interesting, and the more crossover we get is great, and bringing people with different skill sets in. And that's something that Mike over at Tactical Bigfoot Research, he put a comment in there as well earlier, I believe, along the lines of, you know, people are coming from, when people have observations, when they have a sighting, right? A lot of times you look at what they do. Are they police? Are they, you know, in government? Are they just a homemaker? What is their professional background? What that, you know, gives them maybe some sort of credibility or not. You know, different getting researchers and getting people in from different walks of life is really important. I mean,
I agree.
if you're just into backpacking, you have experience out in the woods, you probably know how to survive. Whereas let's say you take, a scientist, PhD, who does a lot of theoretical stuff, but maybe you put that person in the woods and they don't really know their way around the woods. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing they can't learn. But you merge the two and you have a really great team that's able to not only be out in the woods and maybe look for animal sign, look for signs of things, but somebody who can then analyze that. And I think that's a big part of what we all need to be doing a little bit more of. And as Mothman 46, he puts this comment, he says, if people spend an hour in any step of the chicken or beef harvesting business, they'd all be vegan.
Dude, I don't disagree with you.
No,
Michigan,
sure.
where I'm from, like we're right on the border of Michigan. I mean, there's some pretty gnarly factory farms up on like just over the border,
sure,
and
smell a lot of that.
Oh, dude, it's nasty, and it's not a good thing. And a lot of the hunters I know that are really passionate, like even more so than myself, they are totally against the meat industry. They're like, they would be on par with vegans, but they're hunting instead of, eating store-bought plants. It's like, I don't have anything against those people either, because morally you can do whatever you want. Like, I'm not an outdoorsman who's like, screw you vegans, I hate you.
My
like,
way,
I don't care.
right.
Yeah. We need all to get on the same page. Yeah, and be like more concerned about conservation as a whole rather than our individual like little pockets of belief, because like once this stuff's gone, it's gone, man. That's my fear. I've read a lot of scary books in the last few years from just like real like scientists and people who are saying like, there are people in the government, and then like this isn't like conspiracy theory stuff. There are people in the government trying to sell your public lands so that you can't, like people like you to go bigfooting, or people like me who want to hunt or explore or hike national forests. They are trying to sell these to timber industry, and once they're gone, it's over. You see this with the redfoot woods and the forest fires and stuff out west.
That stuff is
once
pretty
it's
brutal.
gone, it's gone, dude. And America's a treasure trove of wilderness. Like it's
this
unprecedented on a global scale.
Yeah. Between the U.S. and Canada, it's amazing the amount of wilderness we have, and I think that's a lot of times. I have family and friends, obviously in Europe, and they don't, they think of something like Bigfoot, they're completely laughing it off. But they don't understand the scale of wilderness here. And I think a lot of people today in our society as well, who have maybe lived in urban areas their whole lives, they just don't understand how much is out there. Even just within an hour or two out of town, you can get in some pretty wild places, let alone some of the places, that I'm sure you've been into that we try to purposely go into, say you are the last line of you're the last person basically you can rely on here, because there's just, it's endless, there's the possibilities are there, but also the life-threatening things that can happen out there. And, Cornell says America is awesome from an immigrant. I am as well. I mean, I'm somebody that came here as a child and I came to really appreciate it. And Kevin says Alex loves the adventure of it all. He's a bullwhip away from becoming Indiana Jones. I don't know about any tomb raiding anytime soon. Mothman says we need to protect our public lands. Totally. We need to protect them and make sure, because, and this is not to get on a soapbox or again, get political or anything. Government is typically not your friend. So, I mean, we have these public lands in these sorts of areas that I think were brilliantly, that's probably one of the best things the government's ever done is national parks and national forests and all that kind of stuff. It's amazing, right? You put these lands aside, but not letting them abuse them, and that's the thing. Or like you said, trying to sell them or get rid of them or restrict them, and obviously there's times where it's needed. I mean, we talk about the forest fires. When we were up in the Pacific Northwest this summer, we saw a lot of that, areas that were simply closed down. And unfortunately, a lot of those fires are caused by people not being negligent. And that's something I think is really important after 2020, when the world was shut down. And I saw an increase up here in New Hampshire, people going out in the woods who had never been out hiking before, camping, because they had nowhere else to go. They might normally go on vacation elsewhere. They were starting fires in the middle of trails, or campsites were overflowing with trash, and people had never been around this. So I want to hopefully reach out to these people and maybe get them on a path where they might understand how to properly care for these lands, because it's not just up to the government or somebody put in charge. It's up to us individually to go out there to not trash and take care of it and leave no trace kind of stuff, the basics. If we can teach more people about that, especially if more people start heading out there, I think that's probably one of the most important things to me, to be honest. But
I agree, because like I've always taken the approach, just from my own personal experience, when I've been in the outdoors and backpacking, and I was an amateur when I started. Like, I didn't just grow up and wake up one day and I'm like, I'm an expert outdoorsman. I still don't believe that, because that's not, like, I don't think, in the end, there are definitely people who are very expert in the outdoors, but in the end,
Sure.
we're all at the will of the elements and all that stuff. You can be the best on earth and you could still die out of exposure by making one mistake. And like, I've always taken the approach, it bothers me so much because I'm on social media a lot. I mean, that's what I do for a living. This is like, I produce media for a local business here. I'm always on social media. And I see so many people just getting jaded and just getting on these soapboxes and basically becoming the holier than thou version of outdoorsmen, and preachy to, like, you have to do this or you're a bad person and stop doing this and blah blah blah. And I've worked in conservation, man. I worked in a group that was all based around like pollution and getting like trash out of rivers and all this stuff. And I would say, after I've read the research working there, and I've done like my own on the ground studies, like, a lot of trash that ends up in the woods is 100% accidental, unless it looks very
Yeah.
obvious. Like, this is not people maliciously going out in the woods throwing trash. Does that happen? Yes. Is there dumps
Yeah.
out there where people throw crap? Yes. Are you, as a social media influencer, going to change people's opinion by saying I'm better than you because I don't do this? No, you're just going to look like an asshole. And like, I hate that so much. It's our job to educate in like a nice way. Like, I never shame anybody in the outdoors because that's not my job.
I will
I've run
say
into
though, one thing, when I get into some of these campsites and I find, even in the campsite or right outside, toilet paper with, fecal matter on
Oh,
it,
dude, that is
I'm
nasty.
like, that's a red line for me. I'm like, I want
Yeah.
to force feed that person that article of toilet paper. Like, you should not be doing that. Of all things, you like, at least bury it, just put it in a bag, take it out, most preferably, or really try and get out and bury it somewhere so it
Yeah.
decomposes.
That
That's
is
like a red
gross.
line. I don't know. But no, I totally agree. I think, as long as you're, because that, again, that comes back to that bullying, people not knowing. And I've seen this happen on hiking forums and Facebook pages where people get berated and people give an opinion like, oh, what to carry when I need safety out in the woods, and that can get very
Just
testy
Google
very
it.
quickly. Yeah, it's like, oh, what are we for your answers? Like, it gets nuts, and so I think totally like that approach. But this comment from New Hampshire Sasquatch is really interesting. This is actually something I was going to bring up earlier that I forgot, but he said the fact that venison is cleaner than most other foods that the industry puts in regular meat, such as growth hormones and pesticides crossing over from the feed they use, makes you think a little. Wild game meat, I mean, it's pretty unparalleled. Like, if you've had real, I mean, even some of the farm stuff, from animals like bison I still find that to be better meat than average cow, beef or
100%
whatever.
agree
But
with you, man.
the wild meat is something amazing, especially if you know the person I'm not a hunter. I've never really been hunting. Yeah, I'd like to get into it at some point, but people who make a good venison stew or something, or just give you a piece to try. It's amazing. And they put the work and the effort into getting that. And it's a special kind of thing.
It's just for people who aren't into that. I know a lot of people who like, oh, deer's disgusting. And I was like, it's just a mental hurdle. And, like, when I was a kid, my dad would bring home deer occasionally. We did the same thing because it's just, we didn't grow up on it, and it's like, if you stop getting in your head about it and eat it, it just tastes like meat. Like, it just, I don't know how to describe it. It's
Yeah.
not, people always say gamey, and I've never had that. I don't understand what they mean by that. Like,
Yeah,
a
I
lot
don't
of the
really get
times,
it
if you
either.
get this, what they call a gamey taste, it's like you accidentally ground up one of their nasty, gnarly scent glands. Like, don't do that. That'll make it taste a little funky. But every clean deer process that I've had or done myself is fine. Like, it tastes great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
100% agree with you.
Oh, for sure. And I think people that are more adventurous in eating, I've tried a lot of weird stuff, but some people really like to get into it. But, everything always compare, hey, how does it compare to chicken, right? Because that's what we're so used to. We're so used to that factory farming, or that's been, present for so long, that when you do try something outside of there, you don't have a base to compare it with. Because again, you're kind of taking for granted all the effort that's going into making that meat, right? I mean, it's not pretty, really isn't. And but I think more people should be exposed to that. I really do. I think more people should be exposed to that. And just, I honestly, I'm all for taking some people and just put them out in the woods and put one person knows what they're doing and kind of give them a crash course. Cause over the years I've seen people who have done that, and it's been really awesome to see people kind of turn into somebody who's an outdoorsman, or somebody who can enjoy the woods and go out there and know what they're doing. I think that's really cool. And I don't say this as an expert at all. I mean, I remember when I first started hiking and backpacking, all the stuff I would bring, and I started downgrading. I'm not one of these super light trail runner guys. They when they're out in the woods, they think they own everything, of course. And they're the ones that, when I'm sitting at the summit putting my jacket on when it's 30 degrees as opposed to 70 down the valley, they're just kind of running back real quick. But
yeah,
it's you learn along the way, and I think Carrick summed that up pretty well earlier. When we were talking about kind of being wrong. To recognize the mistakes one makes is to read the blueprint for how to continue onward. Yeah,
love it. Yeah,
I did want to read one more comment though from my buddy Brian. Awesome guy. He says, nothing better than being out in nature, whether it's conquering a mountain or just enjoying the beauty. There's really nothing better to feed the soul. And Brian's another awesome dude that I've met through Bigfooting. He's also really into hiking, done some hiking together. He's an awesome guy. Great encounter. He wasn't really looking for it. So
cool.
Totally.
Yeah,
awesome.
I agree with you. That is the truest statement I ever heard.
Mothman 46. Imagine the poor squirrel that goes to dig his acorn up and finds a bag of gut logs.
I've never heard the phrase gut logs. That is
gut
beautiful.
Logs,
that's poetry.
That's very, very, very descriptive. Now,
gut
Rebecca
logs.
says it's all about how you process the venison. Interesting. Yep. Yeah. I wouldn't know much about that process either. I've only ever enjoyed the kind of the fruits of other people's labor, but
I've done it once, and if you are into that at all, it's very daunting at first, but I'm the kind of guy that just dives in. It's gory, but yeah, if you process it right, it is good, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment. And to be fair, it's really expensive to get a deer processed. I mean, you're talking about something that's supposed to be saving money and effective, but if you kill a deer and then you go pay like $200-300 to get it processed, to me that kind of defeats the purpose. And I know a lot of my buddies, they all have, they're working, and where I'm working too, and it kind of, it's a trade-off. It's hard. It is a lot of work. It takes a day.
You're still filling the freezer at the end of the day with your own labor.
Yeah, it's just, if you got the money, do it. If you're like me and you just enjoy kind of the learning process, then I would try it. It's not as hard as it looks. And especially the best part about it is, if you screw up, well, you just throw it in the grinder and turn it into hamburger. It doesn't matter what the cut is. If there's meat there, whatever, and you learn and learn and learn, and eventually you get good at it. You can be the next Steven Ranella, getting a whole process in 45 minutes. That's not me. It took me 3 days.
Yeah, no, I totally. I've done some deer skinning before. We used to do when I was doing kind of my naturalism stuff in high school. Yeah. My professor would get roadkill deer donated to him from the state, and we would learn how to skin it and kind of make stuff out of the hides, and that process of not trying to cut a hole with a knife, because you got to get the kind of membrane separated, and that smell stays in your hand for 3 days. The deer smell, and using the intestines to make little ropes by drying them. Really stuff that I think that a lot more people should know. And TC Glasgow says, tried rabbit for the first time. It was better than chicken. And that's interesting. A lot of people, they think rabbit, they think this adorable creature. I wouldn't want to eat that. It's pretty good. I mean, this is actually kind of weird, but one of my earliest memories I have from when I was a kid was my grandfather killing a rabbit. He was showing me how to kill a rabbit because he had rabbits. Yeah. He was a big gardener. This is a guy who lived through, was in the resistance in World War II in former Yugoslavia. Yeah. And, all this stuff. And this was at the end of this was kind of during the Civil War there over in Yugoslavia when I was a kid. And I remember that, that process, it was I don't know if it was traumatic, because as a kid, you see the cartoons with the rabbits, they're so cute. Mm. And then you see that innocence kind of ended right away. It's weird. It's one of those things I remember, but another one of those things. Scarred for life. But I think, it was a learning experience, but there's a lot of really interesting meats out there, and I've heard mountain lions are actually I've heard some people say it's disgusting. Some people actually, probably on Joe Rogan, people are bringing it up in the chat. I've heard one of the hunters he had on there talking about mountain lion tasting pretty good, which you wouldn't think a feline would be tasty, because supposedly their stomachs are very disgusting because of, the processing all the meat, obviously, as carnivores typically are, but they're really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard the backstrap is very good, but yeah, I can't I've never tasted it. I've
And that's such a
never even
rare
seen a
thing
mountain lion.
too. I mean,
Yeah,
those
exactly.
tags are not very common. I mean, hunting mountain lions is not as common as obviously ungulates in the continent. So,
Especially in Ohio. If you got a tag, that'd just be weird because you just be
I know
wasting money out there.
well, especially out here, basically it'd have to be out west, where the official populations are, right? But
Yeah,
Salvatore asks, what do you think Bigfoot would prefer, meat, seafood, or vegetables?
that's an interesting question. Back to Meldrum's book, this part stuck out to me. They said, obviously, primates are omnivores. I mean, they will eat meat, they will eat vegetables, and well, not all primates, chimps specifically. What's the gorillas are basically all herbivores. They only eat plants, and the difference is because you can see on a gorilla, they have these huge distended guts, like these big bellies. They just look like a big fat guy. And that's the fermentation takes place. And then they said, obviously humans are omnivorous. We have these, big fangs here, but
and that reminds me of guys I see in Eastern Europe who drink a lot with the giant belly. All that fermentation.
Reminds me of like half of my friends, man. What are you talking about? But they say like, chimpanzees though have a more flat stomach, and humans too, because we're omnivores. So we're kind of like evolved to process both foods. And every description you've ever heard of a Sasquatch is they kind of have a flatter stomach. So if judging by that one context I have, I would say they would probably be omnivores. They would probably eat whatever they could scavenge, or there's how many reports of them killing deer. Actually, the tattoo I have is a Bigfoot dragging a deer through the woods.
Oh,
and it's
sick.
like, but it's no different, I would think, than a black bear or a grizzly bear. I mean, they're mostly eating berries, and they'll occasionally, if they can get their hands on or their paws on something, they're going to eat it. I mean, the wilderness isn't going to be picky, but if I had to answer your question from a logical standpoint, I would say they're omnivorous. So that's going to be like there's stories of them eating fish and everything they can get their hands on. So from my brain, that's where I'd go. I'd say they're omnivores if they exist.
I would completely agree. I think based on, again, anecdotal stuff, which is there's a lot there, right? We talked a lot about the anecdotal evidence that's at hand, eyewitness sightings, but it seems to make sense. I mean, you have opportunistic times where certain times of the year you have berries and different types of funguses and mushrooms that grow. Perfect thing to eat if you know what you're looking at. And shout out to New Hampshire Sasquatch for teaching me a lot about the foraging stuff out here. But then you have long periods, especially here, I think about here in New England and even further north in Canada, where there's just brutal winter, right? There's not a lot out, barely anything. The only greens you have are evergreens and rhododendrons, which are not the tastiest things you want to eat. But you have moose and other large animals that aren't, unlike bears. Bears are hibernating at that time. The moose and the deer are not. So you have, those are good food. Those are great food sources, other critters. So maybe during the winter months, you might have to rely more on meat, whereas in the summer you'd have more of a choice, into the spring and in the fall where you have other things growing. Then you have the stories of Sasquatch out, especially out in the Pacific Northwest, being seen picking clams and shellfish right on the beaches in British Columbia and Washington. I've heard of people having stories of their fish being stolen while they're out fishing and having them on a rack or something, and they come back and they're gone. Then you've got the opportunistic stuff with humans, dumpster diving. Sasquatch is being mistaken for a bear, and then all of a sudden it stands up. And one of the things I hear, actually, relating back to the berries and the plants in New England, especially, we have the blueberry season, which comes at different points, usually August, for most of New England. And a lot of people have sightings of bears then, because the bears are out eating the berries just like everybody else. The bears will eat meat, but they'll also eat berries too. And then they'll see a bear and it'll stand up on two legs and walk away, and it looks like a man-like hair-covered creature. There's a lot of sightings like that from New England, which I think are really fascinating. So I think it's definitely, I would agree, it would have to be omnivorous, I think, for some of the areas that it lives in. I mean, especially when you get into places like down south. They live in Louisiana. You're telling me they're not going to be doing some crawfish boils down there and doing that kind of stuff, and some boudin and all that.
Hot sauce, the whole shebang.
Your mama on there, Like, come on. No, but in all seriousness, there's those areas like that are more biodiverse for the whole year, like Louisiana, down South Florida. You have snakes, you have all kinds of different things to eat, capybaras, all kinds of invasive species. Depends where you go. And I think if you look at the other animals that exist, people say, how could, a place like New Hampshire support something so large living in the winter. And I say, well, there's larger animals. Look at moose, man. They're huge, and they live in these environments across the Northeast, and pretty much all they do is eat. I mean, they're huge. And
Same.
we have some awesome comments on this in the chat. One from Chris Spencer, awesome researcher, good friend. He says, different groups will be utilizing different food sources. Sasquatch in the Olympic Peninsula, I'd say, take advantage of more fish and clams via beach access, whereas Sasquatch in the Cascades will focus on ungulates, which, I mean, just within an area like Washington, those are two completely different environments. And that makes logical sense to me. I mean, it really does. Cranberries, Cornell brings up, there's sightings from Massachusetts of cranberry bogs, and apparently somebody messing with the cranberries, which turned out to be a Sasquatch, or at least that's what the witness said. So really interesting. Salvatore. Yeah, absolutely. Salvatore followed up. He said, Paul, like your analysis about Bigfoot diet, omnivores explanation, they're definitely opportunistic animals for sure. Really interesting. Les Stroud talked about clams too. Mothman says, in Western Pennsylvania is in an active Bigfoot area. A researcher friend of mine has found piles of river clam shells on a ridgetop, which, is interesting. How would they get there?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
There's no clams growing on a ridgetop, right? Something brought them there. No, and it's super interesting, because once you get you get the wheel turning and you start thinking about the possibilities. I mean, it's interesting. I do got to read this though, because there were some pretty good comments on Gut Logs is a good name for a band. And then Carrick says, Gut Logs, that'll be the name of the American Deathgrass band. Boom. We've created a new genre and a new band.
See, brainstorming session's gone right. I like where this is going. Gut Logs, the all-American Bigfoot bluegrass death metal band.
So for sure. TC Glasgow said, heard some French eat horse. Not sure though. There are some cultures that eat horse meat. I know my mom says growing up she would have horse meat because has a lot of iron. I mean, a lot of meat does with the blood, but horse meat in particular. And back then, she grew up under communism. There wasn't the option to just go like today. You can buy 15 different kinds of beef alone at the grocery store. You didn't have that choice all the time. So they used to, out of necessity, they used to eat horse sausages. I'm not kidding. And I mean, I've never tried it, but
I've heard they still do that in Mexico and South America and places like that. I mean, it's not uncommon. It's just, it's a cultural thing. I mean, America, we're very much on the beef and chicken and lobster and crab, basically, or all the meats we eat most of the time. Get anything too foreign, people are like, ugh. But I wouldn't be opposed to any of that if I had to. I mean, come on.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's interesting. You go to different places and try what's different culture present. I mean, it's Florida, you can eat gator, right?
Yeah.
Louisiana, you eat the crawfish. It depends on where you're going. Up here, instead of crawfish, we got lobster, right? You get to go a good lobster roll, and Drinking Water says they eat Russian olives here in New Mexico, I'm assuming. That's interesting.
That's sweet.
I don't think I've ever heard of that. What are a Russian olive? Something different than, I know there's different kinds of olives, but I don't know if that's New Mexico. That's just what I was assuming. I have no idea. But
sorry, I have no idea on that one. I don't.
Modman says Wendy's used to serve horse allegedly. Haggis here. Yeah. Scotland, they have haggis. I tried that when I was up there in Scotland going to Loch Ness. That's interesting. It's
I've heard only good things.
Yeah, it was like a haggis. It was on a burger. It was like a haggis burger.
Okay.
Their Angus beef obviously is incredible, and I think that's probably some of the best beef as us meat. I feel like this is turning into the meat show slowly.
Welcome to the meat show, people, where we talk about different meats.
Alex and Paul need a plate of chitlins. Now, what is that again? I'm not
pig
super
intestines.
familiar. That's okay. So that's okay. Yeah, there's a Serbian thing that's pretty similar, and it's like pig. It's like this. Oh my god, it's called pichtia. It's basically jellied pig organs in like a jelly. It's I'll send you a picture at some point. It's pretty wild. Good. I've tried it. It's very rough. It's a lot more gruesome than it looks.
I may have had chitlins before because when we were on tour, you often rely on other people's kindness, and we stayed on actually right outside of a Native American reservation in New Mexico, and all like that was the first time I learned that like Native Americans out there are super into heavy metal, and they were just like they treated us like rock stars or nobody, and we were just out there, and they gave me this big bowl of soup, and it had all this weird chunks in it. I'm eating, I'm like, this is so good, thank you. I was like, what is this? And they're like, dude, don't want to know. Trust me, if you like it, just eat it. I would be willing to bet it was probably some sort of intestine or stomach
Oh
or
my
something like
God.
that. So I didn't ask any questions. It tasted fine to me. I've had tongue and stuff like that too. It wasn't terrible, like beef tongue. And
Yeah.
my brother used to live in Texas for a while, and I went down there and visited him, and I ate all the weird taco flavors they had at the little
Nice.
restaurants. So I'm not opposed to that kind of stuff.
Lengua.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, hey, the less you know, the better, I suppose. You know,
Well, even the food you eat now, I'm sure you don't want to know a lot.
oh
about
no,
it.
yeah, exactly. It's that back to that, don't show me how the sausage is made. But you have a lot of these cultures that do eat very, in the US especially, which is just made up of microcultures, right? So many different things, out there, so many different types of meat. I mean, as Paul says, well, I'm assuming he's down under, says over here we eat kangaroo and crocodile, right?
Yeah.
So kangaroos, I mean, do we even have a concept as North American people, I guess, what kangaroos like? Because that's marsupial. We don't really have anything close to that we eat here regularly,
Possum?
Right? I mean,
I don't think people really
how many people eat possum that Yeah, it's I know people that do for sure, but it's not as common. Whereas kangaroos over there that's like deer to them, right? That's in at least how in my perception. So there's some great comments coming in. Black pudding is blood and oats. Yeah, black pudding. Look up black pudding. People think it's not pudding. It's not what Americans think is pudding. We think of like, rice pudding or chocolate pudding or something.
I don't know if I can.
Mothman seems to like it, but
all right.
New Hampshire Sasquatch says it's always fun to prank someone into eating Rocky Mountain oysters. Oh man,
yeah,
absolutely.
Baby.
That is so good. Yeah, I was trying to get Eli to do that this summer when we were in Colorado. He had never heard of that. I think I tried to convince him, but it didn't end up happening.
They actually have a festival out here in Northwest Ohio called the Testicle Festival, and they fry up bull testicles and they eat them. So my uncle's been trying to get me to go for a few years, but it hasn't panned out. I'll probably try it though. I mean,
it's kind of a fun little thing. I don't know. I know that in Serbia there's a festival. Years ago, I kept getting people sending me trailers to this documentary about this, kind of, it was like the festival, the name was like basically a testicle festival kind of thing in Serbia. It's just like anything they could find. Basically, they were putting it up, and it was like totally a bunch of old guys getting drunk and eating different types of testicles. Wow, this show, the paths we've taken, but
I love it. This is what you get with me anytime. It's just a wild ride of nonsense. I love it.
Paul says kangaroo is a very lean and healthy meat. Really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to try.
That'd be sweet.
That at some point. Cornell
you guys also. I mean, there? Yeah.
Cornell says black pudding is tasty. I'm sure. I don't know if that's part of. He grew up in Ireland, Northern Ireland, so I don't know if that's part of what you guys eat. Mothman says in India they worship cows. Here we eat them wholesale. Yep. Yeah. India they are. I've grown up with some Indian friends, and they never have the burgers. They love the chicken though. So kind of depends. Rebecca says, I'm loving this show. Please tell me there's a part 2. Totally. I would love to have Paul back on anytime. Paul is awesome. And Salvatore asks, maybe Bigfoot eat their dead and bury their bones. Maybe that's why we can't find their body. That's something I've heard a little bit about. People say, what if they eat their own, or what if they bury their own, which I don't know how much evidence there is that, other apes do any kind of burying or anything like that. Maybe chimps, I don't know, that eat their own. I mean, who knows? Chimps are crazy.
It's funny that you say that because I always am looking for like podcasts or anything about Bigfoot. I mean, like, a lot of the guys below have podcasts, and they're saying like, I actually was listening to Meat Eater because I'm always bouncing back and forth, and they did a Bigfoot episode with the girl from the Wild Things podcast, who, is a whole season of Bigfoot. And it was so funny because they were talking about Steven Ranella. Obviously, the dude is always out hunting. That's what he does for a living in the woods. And she's like, yeah, it's just crazy. All these people just like, it's so crazy how they never find black bear fossils or skulls anywhere. He's like, what are you talking about? I see them all the time. And she's like, well, no, well, people say they don't see them. And he's like, I literally see them all the time. Like, what are you talking about? So it's like, it's one of those things. It's like one of those things where it's like one person says, what are you talking about? You're crazy. And the other, because they've had the experience and the other person hasn't. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't, if they're as intelligent as a lot of the stories and the like firsthand encounters and stuff have made them out to be, that's a possibility. I don't know. Right. I think human, like modern, anatomically modern humans and maybe Neanderthals are maybe the only two who actually buried bodies that we have physical evidence for. So, I mean, it's another thing. Like, do I know for sure? No, because like they always say, do you have a Bigfoot in your garage? No. Well, me neither. I don't know, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. I'll say that much.
Yeah. Or is it just an
my opinion.
excuse that, Bigfoot people use? That could be it too. But, it's just interesting. A lot of the other kind of qualities that are reported with Sasquatch encounters. So I don't know. It's interesting. I think that point, people do like to hit on that kind of, the animals aren't found out in the woods. You don't find bear or deer. And yeah, you do find evidence of, usually it's kills. I mean, most of the time though, I think when bears and other animals are dying, they go and kind of hide themselves, or they go in places where they're not really going to be found. But there's plenty of times where, animals die of unnatural causes, or they're killed or anything like that. And oh man, there's still a lot of really interesting comments. Splash Padro says head cheese and blood pudding. I do not know what head cheese is, but
I believe that's the one. It's like just pig gelatin and like ground up into like weird jelly, kind of like what you were talking about. That jelly.
That's probably very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've seen it at like delis before, and I was like, I'm brave, but I'm not that brave right now if I don't have to be.
Oh man, Paul Holland, right? He says, once I ate a dog in Korea by mistake. I was at a VIP banquet in a traditional restaurant, layers of rice, kimchi, and meat. Found out later, taste okay though. Okay, I that's something. So I spent some time in Korea. I had some good friends that were from there. I spent time in South Korea, and I remember walking by this market in Seoul and seeing, it was just a Korean market and all kinds of little shops, and there was a dog, basically like a fried dog in a basket, just laying there. And I kind of, out of curiosity, went past it, did a double take, and took a picture of it. And the lady, as soon as she saw me, came and grabbed it and took it inside. She's probably like, oh, another one of these Westerners coming to lecture us about this. And, I've talked to my friends a lot, obviously, we would all kind of, especially those of us that had, kind of immigrant backgrounds, or whatever, we were always busting each other's chops over these things. We're like, oh, dog eaters, whatever. Like, we were joking around with each other. It was all in good fun. But I would ask my friends, especially when I went there, like, so what's the deal with that? And they said that some of the older generations, they did eat dog. And back in the day, it was more out of necessity. Some still do today. It's not very common. But actually, when I was in North Korea, I was on a tour there. And some of the guys in the tourist group with me, they tried dog meat soup, which is called sweet meat soup. And they said that the meat was kind of strange. And maybe that's because they knew it was dog. If you didn't know, I can only imagine. You might not, you might just think it's something else. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it, just because I wouldn't be able to look at my cousin's dog again. It's just one of those things where you kind of, you're talking about meat, you get these ethical things that float around. It's fine to kill one animal, but not another, I don't know. It's weird.
I think it is weird because where do you draw that line? And like, if you didn't know, like if somebody just put a platter of various meats in front of you, it just like throw a dart on a board, pick whatever animals you want, and you didn't know, and you were willing to take that risk, I bet you wouldn't have any of these like weird cultural qualms. You just eat it and either be like, I don't like the way this tastes, or I do. Like, I think that's what it would boil down to, because, I've heard Hunter, like, I don't want to keep bringing up Meat Eater. I sound like a fanboy.
No, they're awesome.
Because I think they're great. And Steve and Ranella ate monkey, and he said he'd never eat monkey because they just look too much like humans. And he tried it when he was in South America, and he was like, it wasn't that bad. He's like, I just had to shut my brain off and go for it. And like I said, we go back to human history. I mean, these things only existed until we've been as comfortable and as lazy as we are, where we'll do what we're doing right now, sit around and chat for 3 hours, 2 hours about whatever we want to talk about, and go home and relax. And before that, it was like hunt, eat, find food. It didn't matter if it was a possum, a squirrel, a dog, a cat running around. If you were hungry, you were going to eat it. And that's just like, that's been most of our existence until very recently. Like, we're talking
for sure.
years.
Picky, being able to be picky. It's very, very recent. Mothman says monkey brains on the half shell. Imagine how good Sasquatch brain matter tastes. It just reminds me of Indiana Jones, the Temple of Doom, like the eating the monkeys.
Right out of it. That'd be a big brain to eat, man. Whew.
Oh, for sure. He says Cornell says in Ukraine, they ate their children during the famine. You've heard that. I mean, I've heard of that in other places as well, out of necessity. I remember once when I was a kid, I read the story about, was that they made a movie out of it, but it was, I think one of the soccer teams was in Argentina or something. They crashed down there in the Andes, and they ended up eating a bunch of the wounded members of the crew because, they had nothing else. And it's one of those things, conversations, cannibalism, that really gets people kind of. I had a professor too that I think told a story of when he was in Rwanda during the genocide there. He was talking about they had this meat one time that he was pretty sure was probably human, but they wouldn't tell him. But they were so desperate, they had nothing else to eat, that they just ate whatever they had because there was nothing else. And there's people being chopped left and right in half with machetes, and that, yeah. It's
back
it's
to how good
crazy.
we have it here.
We do. Yeah. And it's hopefully it doesn't ever get to that level, but I think most of human history has been like that. It's been crazy.
Yeah.
People are mentioning Anthony Bourdain in the comments too. Yeah, that guy was definitely quite an eater. We'll put it that way. A lot of different things being
scared.
Eaten. Famine, baby back ribs. Oh, it's getting to that point where it's like the meat conversation is getting morbid. It's getting really messed up. So we're probably we'll close it down on there. Korea developed rather quickly. The older generation lived in days of ox and cart. Yeah, that's a super interesting perspective, and we could go on an entire tangent about that. But Korea, especially South Korea, is now one of the most high-tech countries in the world. But 100 years ago was basically an impoverished, very poor country. And you see the way North Korea and South Korea have developed. Super fascinating. I've been really into that, especially after having been there.
It's amazing.
Totally wild. There's so many good comments. Carrick says, eating each other is very interesting in great apes. Chimps will sometimes eat enemy chimpanzees after killing it, regardless of how recent their last meal was. I mean, that's something I've heard in conflicts around the world, where they'll rip the heart out of the enemy and eat it after battle, and it gives them strength or whatever, right? That's something that's...
Yeah, cannibalism's scary, man.
It is. And Splash
That's
says,
true too, yeah.
If you've ever skinned a black bear, how it looks like a muscular human, it's kind of scary. I've seen pictures of that. That is definitely
creepy,
brutal. What the heck? Mount Fuji fed 2 wrestlers' dog, showed the heads after they ate. I don't know what to make of that. I'm sorry. A lot of people are saying part 2 to the chat. Set up part 2. Totally. We'll absolutely have to have Paul back on. Yeah, I think we'll start wrapping it up here. But
sure.
Awesome questions as always. Now,
you guys
people that want to find you, obviously, I have linked your YouTube channel down in the comments or in the description. But where would you like to people to come and look for you if you want to find Aptitude Outdoors or just follow you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely am on YouTube. That's where I post all of my podcasts. You can also find me on your generic podcast players, whatever. It's just everything's Aptitude Outdoors, YouTube, Facebook. But I'm not dancing on TikTok. I'm just posting my podcast. So you don't have to live through that horror of me trying to be like funny dance guy, because that's not going to happen. But yeah, any social media platform. And, I'm mostly on Instagram. That's kind of like where I kind of got my start, posting about my outdoor adventures. And that's kind of where the podcast came out of. Also, I have, aptitudeoutdoors.com, which is just like everything kind of compiled into one thing. And yeah, I have everything from backpackers, bikers, kayakers, hikers, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I got a dog bane encounter. I got so much wild stuff on my podcast. If you want to listen to any of it, it's on there. And yeah, that's it, man. I appreciate you having me on. And again, Alex's conversation with me is going to be out this Thursday as well. I know you got the Small Town Monsters like public release coming that instead of my podcast, so I don't blame any of you as well. But if you want to check that out and check my show out as well, Alex and I had is the opposite of this conversation. He did all the talking, I did all the question asking, but I really like this live thing, man. I was pretty nervous at first, I'm not gonna lie, but this is
fun,
really
right?
Fun. Yeah,
a lot of awesome people. No, seriously, guys, go check out. Yeah, you always get a little bit. I always love it. We had a lot of big names popping in tonight, right? But definitely go check out Aptitude Outdoors, guys. Seriously, I've been listening to some of the episodes throughout the week here. Awesome. Since a couple weeks ago when I recorded the show with Paul, because I hadn't really heard of him before that, which I think is awesome. There's so many great episodes. And again, it's not just Bigfoot stuff. So if you want to learn about other outdoor stuff, I mean, you had people who are extreme kayakers, to say the least, among other things. So definitely go check that out. What's the YouTube link? I think it should be in the description. If it's not, it will be as soon as I'm off. So that's to the YouTube. Laughing Picker says, my dad survived a camp in Siberia. He would eat anything. I did want to read that because I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. The necessity, right?
And that's tough.
Pickiness goes to the side.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, thanks to everyone in the comments. Cornell also says, I will totally sub.
Thank you.
Good night to everyone. Thank you, Sandra. Everyone was saying it was a great show. Really appreciate that, guys. We're just having a good time, and we're just having a fun conversation at the end of the day. So having a good time as always. So thanks again, everybody. And just a reminder, if you want to check out more episodes like this, we have all of them listed on the channel playlist, Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. Next week, we'll be having on Shelly Covington, Montana. Really interesting Bigfoot researcher. Excited to talk to her. She gets out there in some pretty wild areas too. So I'm sure we'll be talking about all that. And remember, this Thursday, coming out on the Small Town Monsters channel is Beyond the Trail, Rocky Mountain Sasquatch. So everyone have a good night. Thank you, TC Glasgow, Fivehead, Cornell, everybody else in the chat. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys.